Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. Spain on April 7th, 2021. 29-year-old Helen Arias left her home in the city of Oviedo and vanished without a trace. She was heading to a small rural area in the Leon province, where her former partner's family lived. The trip didn't raise any red flags. Helen had taken this route before. She hadn't mentioned any issues, and she planned to return the same day. But by evening, she stopped responding to messages. Not long after, her phone went silent as well. Her car was later found with her personal belongings still inside, but there was no sign of Helen. What began as a missing person case quickly escalated into a high-profile investigation. Conflicting accounts, silence from key witnesses, and a series of details that just didn't add up only deepened the mystery. With every new clue, the story took a darker turn. But at the time, no one could have imagined where it would eventually lead. Helen Arias was born in 1992 in Oviedo, a city in the autonomous community of Asturias in northern Spain. She came from a middle-class background. Her parents led a quiet, steady life, working regular jobs and striving to give their daughter a stable and supportive environment. Helen was their only child, and her upbringing focused heavily on fostering responsibility and independence. The family home was calm and serious arguments were rare. Even as a young girl, Helen stood out for her organization and strong self-discipline. She didn't need constant supervision and consistently kept her promises to both her parents and her teachers. During her years in elementary and high school, she was a solid student. Outside of school, she preferred quiet time with her family or engaging in solo hobbies rather than large social circles. By the time she reached high school, she was already certain about her future. She wanted to help others. After graduating, Helen enrolled at the University of Oviedo, choosing a field focused on social work and psychology. Her main goal was to gain practical tools to support people facing life's toughest moments. During college, she kept a low profile. She wasn't involved in campus politics or social activism, focusing entirely on subjects that aligned with her personal beliefs and interests. Those who knew Helen described her as serious, reserved, yet kind-hearted. She wasn't drawn to risky situations and preferred a slow, steady pace of life. Her decisions were always well thought out, and she avoided impulsive behavior. While she didn't show emotions outwardly, she spoke with sincerity. She had a small, close-knit circle of trusted friends, and was known as someone others could rely on. Throughout both school and college, she stayed away from sketchy groups or disruptive behavior. Jose Angel Bobadilla was a few years older than Helen. By the time they met, he had already finished school and was working. Their paths first crossed in 2018 in Oviedo during a casual hangout with mutual acquaintances. After that, they kept in touch, and their relationship slowly began to grow. It was steady without any obvious signs of conflict. At first, Jose came across as thoughtful and respectful. He showed a genuine interest in Helen's life, respected her personal space, was punctual and polite. All of this matched what Helen considered appropriate behavior in a relationship, so she had no reason to doubt him. A few months into their relationship, Jose introduced Helen to his family. He lived in Prado de la Caspina, a small rural town in the Leon province. Helen met the Bobadilla family in 2019. She was introduced to his mother, father, and younger sister, Andrea. On the surface, everything seemed calm. His parents didn't show any resistance to Helen. Their conversation was formal but respectful. Jose's sister Andrea, being younger, seemed curious and friendly toward her brother's girlfriend. Helen didn't notice anything alarming during that first visit. His family appeared courteous, even if a bit reserved. As time passed, their relationship continued to develop. Helen started spending more time with Jose's family, and regular trips from Oviedo to Prado de la Caspina became a normal part of her routine. Jose was supportive and helped her with everyday issues. He didn't place unrealistic expectations on her and spoke about their future together, often sharing his long-term goals. However, when it came to his job situation, things weren't as steady. His income was inconsistent, and he had an outstanding debt of over 13,000 euros. Helen was aware of it, but she didn't view it as a red flag. She saw it as his personal issue and didn't feel obligated to get involved. Helen also maintained a friendly rapport with Andrea. Jose's sister was warm, talkative, and often shared her thoughts with Helen openly. Gradually, Helen became more involved in the Bobadilla family's life, blending into their everyday routine. By 2020, though, things between Helen and Jose began to shift. Beneath the surface of calm, cracks were starting to show. Their conversations turned tense more frequently. Jose's behavior became inconsistent, and he began making vague references to personal struggles he didn't fully explain. The underlying issue appeared to be that same debt, now over 13,000 euros, which still hadn't been resolved. Although Helen had known about it, Jose avoided discussing repayment plans, never clarified how he intended to manage it, and wouldn't say whether he was facing pressure from anyone else. He didn't offer any concrete solutions, nor did he seek help. Instead, Jose grew more withdrawn. He would sometimes disappear for long periods, ignoring messages and offering no explanation for his silence. His mood became increasingly irritable and distant. What had once seemed like a dependable relationship was beginning to show clear signs of emotional detachment. Around this time, Andrea's presence in their lives became increasingly noticeable. Jose's sister was often nearby, joining conversations, being present at get-togethers. While she never expressed open hostility, her behavior began to carry a quiet unease. Her conversations with Helen turned more formal, losing the warmth they once had. Andrea never criticized her brother directly or commented on his actions, but her silence only emphasized the growing tension within the family. By early 2021, the issue of Jose's outstanding debt began to take on a more pressing tone. He started mentioning that creditors were demanding repayment, and fast. He never revealed exactly who was behind the pressure, but made it clear that things were serious. Helen didn't push for answers, but it was obvious that the stress on him was building. He began complaining about not having enough time, canceling meetups with vague excuses. His texts became shorter, and he avoided any conversation about their future together. The tension escalated when Jose brought up selling the car they had previously used together in order to pay down part of the debt. Technically, the car was his. It had been purchased with help from his family. Helen didn't object, but the suggestion itself signaled that things were deteriorating fast. Jose was now looking for quick fixes, yet he kept his family out of these financial discussions, which made Helen question how seriously he was trying to address the issue or whether he had any real plan at all. Around this period, communication between Helen and Jose's parents came to a halt, where once she would occasionally speak with them during visits. That now stopped entirely. Andrea remained her only point of contact with the family, but even that role had become minimal. Helen found herself more and more in the dark about what was going on. The debt situation became more urgent, but the flow of information only shrank. Jose had grown distant, avoided discussions, and refused help. There were no direct arguments between them, but his increasing passivity became the clearest sign that the relationship was unraveling. By spring 2021, things had turned strictly formal. Their meetings became rare, and communication was reduced to sporadic texts. Joint plans disappeared. Jose no longer talked about the future, or showed any interest in long-term prospects. Though he never officially ended the relationship, he had clearly pulled away. Helen didn't attempt to restore what they once had. She understood that if the relationship was going to continue, the next step had to come from him, but it never did. That financial conflict marked the beginning of a larger breakdown. Jose's behavior reflected an inner struggle he couldn't seem to manage. On April 7, 2021, Helen Arias left her home in Oviedo around 9 a.m. She was headed to Prado de la Caspina, the small town in Leon province where Jose Bobadilla lived. Although her visits had become less frequent, Helen still went to see Jose and his family from time to time. The route was familiar, and she planned to return home that same day. She told her mother she was taking a trip to Prado de la Caspina and reassured her that everything was fine. Her voice didn't carry any signs of distress. Helen's phone remained active until around noon. The last recorded activity occurred at about 1 p.m. After that, she went silent. Helen stopped answering messages, didn't return calls, and didn't appear online. Repeated attempts to reach her went unanswered. At first, Helen's family didn't suspect anything was wrong. Her mother figured she might have simply been delayed. But as the evening went on, closer to 8 p.m., worry started to grow. Helen still hadn't made contact, and her phone was off. She hadn't come home, even though she had always kept her family informed about any changes to her plans. Messages went unanswered, and there was no activity on her messaging apps. By 10 p.m., concern turned into panic. The family tried reaching out to Jose, but he claimed he hadn't seen Helen that day and hadn't received any messages from her. His response didn't sit right. Considering that she had told her mother she was heading to see him, his statement didn't align with what they expected. What stood out even more was his lack of urgency. He didn't offer to help, didn't drive to Oviedo, and didn't make any move to get involved. His behavior seemed unusually passive. The next morning, Helen's family went to the police and officially reported her missing. The authorities began checking her last known movements and contacts. One of the first steps was to trace her phone. The data confirmed that Helen had indeed reached Prado de la Caspina. Her phone's last location showed her in the area around midday. After that, the signal was lost. Officers began canvassing the area, speaking with residents. One witness claimed to have seen someone matching Helen's description near the edge of town earlier that day, but no clear identification was possible. There were few security cameras in the area, and none had recorded any trace of Helen. There was no evidence that she had been at the Bobadilla house. Jose insisted she never arrived. Andrea gave a similar account. The idea that Helen hadn't made it to her destination didn't match the phone's geolocation data. That only deepened the suspicion. Investigators began looking into the relationship between Helen and Jose, as well as his family background. At the same time, Helen's relatives turned to social media to ask for help. They posted her photo and description, and the first public message about her disappearance began circulating. During the first 24 hours, police found no signs of a forced disappearance. The car Helen had driven was located near a train station in a nearby town. It was locked, had no visible damage, and all her belongings, including her bag and ID, were inside. The phone was missing, but the interior of the car was undisturbed, with no signs of struggle or disorder. That detail raised further concerns. If Helen had left the vehicle voluntarily, she wouldn't have left behind everything she had with her. The theory that she had run away or chosen to disappear on her own didn't match either the facts or her personality. She had no history of mental health challenges, impulsive behavior, or self-destructive tendencies. The next step was to officially broaden the search. Police reached out to locals, inspected nearby buildings and wooded areas, and began organizing a coordinated effort. Search dogs and drones were deployed. Volunteers from the community joined in. The family's appeal for help was picked up by local news outlets, and the case started to gain wider public attention. Despite growing efforts, the first 48 hours after Helen's disappearance yielded no concrete leads about her exact whereabouts. Her phone remained out of service. Jose and his relatives maintained that they hadn't seen Helen that day. Neither he nor Andrea volunteered to assist in the search or expressed concern publicly. By the end of the second day, the case was officially treated as a potential criminal act. Investigators opened a formal case under statutes related to possible forced disappearance. They decided to focus search efforts within a 3-mile radius of Helen's last known phone signal. The status of the case changed. It was transferred to a specialized investigative unit. From that moment, the theory of an accidental event was no longer on the table. On April 11, 2021, 4 days after Helen Arias was last seen, her body was discovered by a group of civilian volunteers who had joined the search. They were combing through an area near the edge of town when one of them noticed broken branches and unusual markings that led toward a ravine. At the bottom, hidden beneath dense vegetation and a layer of debris, was the body. Police immediately sealed off the scene. During initial examination, they found Helen lying on her back. Her wrists had been restrained with plastic zip ties. Marks around her neck suggested strangulation, and a visible head injury pointed to blunt force trauma. Her face showed signs of damage. Although no signs of a struggle were found at the site, the surrounding soil showed drag marks, indicating the body had likely been moved there post-mortem. Nearby, investigators found cut zip ties, pieces of cloth, and a torn bag. Tire tracks in the area suggested that a vehicle had been used. There were no indications of intimate assault based on the condition of her clothes and body. However, strands of hair that did not belong to Helen were found close by and sent for DNA analysis. All evidence was documented and collected from the scene. Authorities recorded the depth of the ravine, possible entry paths, and a rough timeline estimating when the body had been placed there. The forensic report confirmed the cause of death was asphyxiation. While the blow to the head was serious, it wasn't fatal, though it likely caused unconsciousness. The time of death aligned with the period when Helen's phone had stopped transmitting signals. Medical experts concluded that she passed away within 1 to 2 hours of her last recorded phone activity. Her body showed no signs of prolonged exposure to the elements, indicating that it had been brought to the site after death and hastily concealed with whatever materials were at hand. That same day, law enforcement launched a rapid response to identify and detain those involved. The first to be taken into custody were Andrea Bobadilla and her former partner Raul. During questioning, Andrea revealed key information. She admitted to helping cover up the body and identified Jose as the one who initiated the act. According to her account, the confrontation between Jose and Helen happened inside the family home where the crime took place. Jose Bobadilla was taken into custody just a few hours later. He didn't resist arrest. During his first interrogation, he denied any involvement and insisted that Helen never came to see him that day. However, this claim was later contradicted by Andrea's testimony and data from Helen's phone geolocation records. Evidence collected from the site where Helen's body was found matched items located at the Bobadilla residence. Blood traces were discovered on the floor of a utility room. Forensic tests confirmed the blood belonged to Helen. Packaging from zip ties and scraps of fabric were identical to the materials found at the ravine. As the investigation progressed, authorities were able to reconstruct the sequence of events. Helen had arrived in town and was met by Jose. At some point, a confrontation occurred. Jose struck her, which caused Helen to lose consciousness. He then proceeded to take her life by asphyxiation. Andrea and Raul assisted in disposing of the body, transporting it under cover of night to a remote ravine. All of this happened without witnesses. Within 48 hours of the arrest, investigators had gathered enough evidence to file formal charges. All 3 individuals were placed in custody. The case was officially classified as a criminal offense involving premeditated action and concealment. During his questioning, Raul refused to testify. He did not confirm Andrea's account, nor did he offer an alternative version of events. His attorney stated that Raul was present, but unaware of the real purpose of the trip. However, investigators concluded that Raul knowingly participated, pointing to his behavior afterward. He didn't report what had happened and actively helped cover it up. At his third interrogation, Jose partially admitted to what had occurred, claiming he acted in a state of emotional overwhelm. But investigators determined that his actions were intentional and deliberate. He made no attempt to call for help, never reported the incident, and took active steps to conceal what had happened. Andrea and Raul were identified as accomplices. According to case documents, both had the chance to step away, but instead chose to help destroy evidence. The body of evidence included physical findings, Andrea's statement, DNA analysis, mobile phone records, and forensic evaluations of items from both the house and the burial site. The investigation concluded with charges including unlawful killing, complicity, concealment of a body, and providing false statements. All 3 remained in custody awaiting trial. The trial surrounding Helen Arias' death began in early 2022. The main defendants were Jose Bobadilla, his sister Andrea, and Andrea's former partner Raul. Prosecutors classified the act as a deliberate crime involving multiple participants, followed by efforts to hide the body and destroy evidence. During court proceedings, Jose partially acknowledged his role, admitting to the argument and the physical altercation, but denying intent. His defense argued that he had been emotionally unstable, provoked, and had not meant for things to escalate. The court ultimately did not accept that version. Witness testimonies, evidence from the scene, and Jose's actions following the incident were interpreted by the court as deliberate. Andrea confirmed her earlier statements during the trial. She detailed each participant's role, maintaining her previous account. Jose was the main perpetrator, while she and Raul assisted in concealing what had happened. Her defense asked the court to consider the pressure she faced from her brother and the fact that she didn't take part in any aggressive actions. Raul remained silent throughout the proceedings. His attorney argued that he had no intent and wasn't fully aware of what he was being drawn into. At the conclusion of the trial, the court found all 3 guilty. Jose Bobadilla was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Andrea received 8 years for assisting and covering up the crime. Raul was given 6 years for aiding and abetting. The prosecution deemed the sentences fair. Helen's family was present at the hearings. Her mother took the role of a private complainant. Her stance was firm. She pushed for the maximum possible penalties. After the verdict was read, she expressed disappointment, stating that the sentences given to Andrea and Raul were too lenient. Jose's family declined to comment. Several months after sentencing, Jose Bobadilla's defense filed an appeal. Their main argument was that key evidence used in the initial trial should have been ruled inadmissible. His lawyers claimed that Andrea's confession had been made under pressure, and that the items found in the family home didn't conclusively link Jose to the act. They also questioned whether the forensic evaluation met the required legal standards. The appellate court agreed to review the case. In the second trial, prosecutors maintained their position, pointing to Jose's coordinated actions, the concealment of Helen's body, false statements, and his failure to call for help. However, the defense introduced new arguments. They claimed the blow Helen received wasn't fatal, and that medical reports did not conclusively prove asphyxiation. They emphasized the absence of a clear motive and the influence of public pressure during the initial trial. During this second round, Andrea walked back parts of her original confession, saying she had spoken under emotional distress. Raul also didn't confirm what he had said earlier. This weakened the prosecution's case. The court ruled some of the earlier evidence inadmissible, given the retracted testimony and lack of direct proof of physical harm by Jose. The court concluded there wasn't enough to support a guilty verdict. In 2023, Jose was acquitted due to insufficient evidence and released from custody. The ruling caused a strong public reaction. Helen's family called the decision unjust. Her mother accused the court of undermining trust in the justice system. Prosecutors appealed the acquittal, but the higher court declined to reopen the case. Following Jose Bobadilla's acquittal, public debate intensified. For weeks, social media was filled with commentary, much of it criticizing the legal system. Opinions were split. Some believed the acquittal was a miscarriage of justice, while others pointed to the lack of solid evidence. Public confidence in law enforcement and the courts came under sharp scrutiny. Andrea and Raul's situation received less attention. They continued serving their sentences. The Bobadilla family did not make any public statements after the conclusion of legal proceedings. In Helen Arias' case, some key questions, especially about Jose's motive, remained unanswered. In both trials, he never clearly explained why things happened the way they did. Investigators believe the conflict escalated due to unresolved financial issues, emotional stress, and a breakdown in the relationship. Engagement really makes a difference. Case 2. Even in the most loving and tight-knit families, disagreements, misunderstandings, and conflicts can arise. Yet it's often within the family that people seek comfort, support, and validation. But the closer the bonds, the more dangerous and unforgiving things can become. Of course, enemies don't appear out of nowhere. Anger and resentment can quietly simmer for years. But when all those negative emotions finally explode, the results can be truly devastating. The story of a young woman named Anjana Lama Mahit is both disturbing and deeply unsettling in its intensity. The crime took place inside the walls of a luxurious home owned by a well-respected family. Everyone involved hoped to sweep the matter under the rug, allegedly going so far as to offer bribes to law enforcement. What makes this case even more shocking is that the Mahit family had always been seen as a picture of success and harmony. They never aired their grievances in public, and that's exactly why what happened took everyone by surprise. Anjana Lama was born on August 26, 1995, in the small industrial town of Hitauda, located in the southern central region of Nepal. She was the eldest in a large family with limited financial means. Growing up, she helped raise her 3 younger sisters and her brother, taking on responsibilities well beyond her years. She also supported her mother with household chores, cleaning, doing laundry, and learning to cook at an early age. From a young age, Anjana had a special charm that made her stand out. Her kind and caring nature, combined with a warm personality, drew people in. She was friendly, always willing to lend a hand, and had a natural ability to connect with others, whether classmates, neighbors, or strangers. Academically, Anjana was a solid student. While not at the top of her class, her teachers consistently noted her intelligence, determination, and mature attitude toward her studies. Everyone believed she had a bright future ahead. With her striking looks and slim, athletic figure, Anjana began attracting attention during her teen years. But it wasn't just her appearance that made her popular. She had a fun, light-hearted personality and could easily become the life of any social gathering. She avoided confrontation and always tried to resolve disagreements peacefully. Anjana had a real talent for drawing and dreamed of becoming an artist, fashion designer, or working in the beauty industry. She had all the potential to succeed, but she couldn't rely on financial support or connections from her family. Everything she achieved would have to come from her own hard work. While still in school, she met a young man named Prajwal Mahit, who was a year older. He came from a high-status Chetri family, while Anjana's background was from the Tamang ethnic group, historically of Mongolian descent. His parents, Pushpa and Kamal Bahadur, were wealthy, well-known, and highly respected in the community. His older brother Ujwal was a successful sound producer, and had even worked on promoting one of Nepal's most famous songs, Sunaseli. From the start, there was a strong mutual attraction between Anjana and Prajwal. They became close friends and started spending more and more time together. They shared many interests, hobbies, and ambitions. Still, they initially kept their distance, knowing that their different backgrounds made any relationship between them socially unacceptable. But as time passed, their bond deepened into something much more than friendship. They couldn't imagine being apart and made a promise to stay together, no matter what, even if it meant going against deeply rooted traditions. Naturally, when their relationship came to light, both families strongly opposed it and forbade them from seeing each other. Ujwal, Prajwal's older brother, was the only one willing to support the couple. Touched by their story and believing in the sincerity of their feelings, he agreed to help. Together, they came up with a plan to leave quietly and arranged a private wedding. Ujwal even paid for the ceremony out of his own pocket. His intentions were noble, but once news of the marriage broke, it sparked a serious family scandal. The couple tied the knot in late 2016. Anjana was 21 years old at the time, and her new husband had just turned 22. For the first few months, the newlyweds had to move from one low-cost rental apartment to another. Without stable jobs or reliable income, they relied heavily on Ujwal's financial help. Prajwal was doing his best to find employment, but the only opportunities he could secure were short-term and low-paying gigs. In early February 2017, Prajwal received a call from his mother, Pushpa. They talked for several hours. She tried to convince her younger son to come back home, but he made it clear he wouldn't go anywhere without his wife. Eventually, it was agreed that both he and Anjana would move into the Mahit family home, a large estate located in the bustling city of Lalitpur. Prajwal was the youngest child in the family. His two older sisters were already married and had moved in with their husbands. At the Mahit residence, the household now included his parents, his brother Ujwal, Ujwal's wife Aishwarya, and their son Santosh. Anjana's first few months in her new were far from welcoming. She constantly felt out of place and sensed an unspoken hostility from almost everyone around her. She had no idea how to earn the approval of her in-laws, and it was clear she wasn't fully accepted. Things were made even more difficult by the fact that she had no one to confide in. Her own parents were still upset with her, and they weren't even speaking over the phone. During a major holiday, when the Mahit home filled with extended family, longtime friends, and business associates of Kamal Bahadur, Anjana wasn't even allowed to come out of her room. It was painfully obvious that the family was ashamed to introduce her to their guests, due to her less prestigious background. The slight was devastating, and she spent the entire evening alone, crying behind closed doors. Despite everything, Anjana tried her best to be kind and respectful. She never raised her voice, never argued, and did all she could to fit in. Soon after they settled in, the family patriarch arranged a job for Prajwal at one of the major companies he worked with. It was a way of giving his son some independence, while still keeping him under close watch. Prajwal quickly began to succeed, earning respect, climbing the corporate ladder, and bringing in a decent income. The Mahit household ran on strict rules that applied to everyone, even with house staff and help. Every family member had specific responsibilities. Disrupting the order was not acceptable. Each morning, the adults left for work, and the kids went off to school. Only Anjana stayed behind. She had yet to find a job, and her in-laws didn't seem in any hurry to assist her in getting one. In May 2017, Anjana told her husband that she was finally ready to chase a dream she had carried with her for years, opening a small beauty salon in their neighborhood. She had already found a location for lease, researched the details, assessed the market demand for the services she wanted to offer, and even put together a business plan. But there was one problem. She didn't have the startup capital to make it happen. At that point, Prajwal had started earning a decent income and had managed to set some money aside, but it still wasn't enough. He turned to his parents for help, but they refused, skeptical that Anjana's idea could succeed. Once again, Ujwal stepped in. He believed in her vision and provided the funds she needed to get her business off the ground. Anjana threw herself into the project with incredible passion. She poured her heart into the salon, and it didn't take long before it started to pay off. The business became profitable rather quickly. Her success didn't go unnoticed. Her in-laws, who had once doubted her, now saw her in a whole new light. They began to recognize her as an independent, ambitious, and intelligent woman with a natural talent for business. Over time, the Mahat family's attitude toward Anjana changed. They started to value her opinions, show her genuine respect, and eventually accepted and embraced her as part of the family. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace and belonging. However, one thing still weighed on her. She hadn't reconnected with her own parents, and the silence between them remained unbroken. That's when Anjana came up with an idea. Her younger brother had just graduated from school, and she suggested he move to Lalitpur to attend one of the city's universities, where he would have far more opportunities than in their rural hometown. The plan was for him to live with Anjana and Prajwal in the Mahat family home, under her care and guidance. Prajwal's parents didn't object to the idea. In fact, they were open to welcoming the teenager into their household. To finalize everything, both families decided to meet in person. During this conversation, Anjana's parents saw firsthand that the Mahats were supportive and willing to provide a good environment for their son while he pursued his education. This meeting opened the door for reconciliation. Anjana was finally able to reconnect with her parents, and the misunderstandings and tension between them began to fade. From that point on, the two families stayed in close contact. Anjana and Prajwal made regular visits, and Anjana spoke with her mother almost daily. Her brother enrolled in a respected university, and the Mahat household welcomed him with warmth and kindness. As social media began to take off in Nepal, Anjana created several personal accounts across different platforms. The one that really stood out to her was TikTok. She began posting short videos showing the day-to-day life of her beauty salon, sharing skincare routines, product reviews, and tips on creating stylish looks. With her striking appearance, charisma, and confidence, Anjana quickly gained attention online. Her content started to go viral, and her follower count climbed into the tens of thousands. Viewers admired her radiant, almost Hollywood-like beauty, flooded her comment sections with compliments, and trusted her advice. Her online presence became an extension of her growing influence in both business and lifestyle. At one point, Anjana caught the attention of a modeling agency. They began offering her opportunities to participate in various photo shoots, promotional campaigns, and runway shows. For Anjana, it felt like a dream come true, something she had only fantasized about in her younger years. She seized every chance to put herself out there, and quickly became a local celebrity. Confident and composed in front of the camera, Anjana embraced her new role. She experimented with a wide range of styles, including some daring and bold looks. Her modeling fees increased rapidly, and before long, her beauty salon started taking a back seat. Eventually, she closed the business altogether. Modeling had become her full-time career, and it was significantly more lucrative. Her popularity continued to soar, reaching far beyond the borders of Nepal. International modeling agencies began expressing interest in her work, offering attractive contracts and opportunities abroad. She and her husband started seriously considering a move overseas. Their top choice was Canada, and soon the couple began preparing for the transition. When they broke the news to their families, the reactions were calm but cautious. While neither set of parents was thrilled about the idea of them moving so far away, no one tried to stop them. In fact, both families offered their support in helping the couple pursue their dream. Back in 2018, Ujjwal had begun facing serious health complications following a prolonged illness. He started losing his hearing at a rapid pace, and by the end of the year, he was no longer able to work as a sound. It was a devastating blow, but during this difficult time, Prajwal was his greatest support, helping him stay afloat emotionally. News of Prajwal's potential move to another country came as yet another emotional shock to Ujjwal. Adding fuel to the fire was Ujjwal's wife, Aishwarya. It's important to note that their marriage had been arranged. His parents had selected Aishwarya from a wealthy and influential family. She carried herself with pride and a sense of superiority. From the moment Anjana moved into the Mahat family home, Aishwarya took a strong dislike to her. She often made it clear that she believed Anjana didn't belong in their circle. Things eventually seemed to calm down, but when Anjana successfully launched her beauty salon and began to gain recognition, Aishwarya's jealousy began to show. The tension intensified when Anjana transitioned into modeling and started to thrive. She was young, beautiful, successful, and had built her career from the ground up. Even Anjana's in-laws, once skeptical, had grown to respect her deeply and considered her their favorite. Aishwarya, on the other hand, was consumed with resentment over Anjana's rising success. Fueled by bitterness, Aishwarya started spreading gossip and creating divisions within the family. She painted a damaging picture of Anjana, claiming that her modeling career was a cover for questionable behavior and alleged secret relationships. To back up her claims, she showed the in-laws photos of Anjana from swimsuit advertisements and insisted that such images were inappropriate for a married woman. Aishwarya had stirred up family drama on more than one occasion, but each time Anjana's husband stood by her and managed to de-escalate the situation. Over time, the rest of the family grew tired of Aishwarya's provocations, and her emotional outbursts were no longer taken seriously. That's when she shifted her focus to her own husband, Ujwal, trying to turn him against Anjana. The situation worsened dramatically when Ujwal's illness forced him to stop working. Now, spending most of his time at home, he became a captive audience for Aishwarya's ongoing complaints. She continually painted Anjana in a negative light, accusing her of causing rifts within the family. When she learned that Anjana and Prajwal were preparing to move to Canada, her frustration boiled over. Blinded by envy and resentment, Aishwarya began telling Ujwal that Anjana was tearing the family apart and planning to take Prajwal away for good. With his health failing and his younger brother being one of his few sources of emotional support, Ujwal started to believe that he was being abandoned, left alone during the hardest time of his life. Anjana had previously shared with her parents how difficult things had become living under the same roof as Aishwarya. She explained that Aishwarya constantly tried to sabotage her and spread false rumors. Her mother advised her to stay calm, avoid reacting to hostility, and not to air the family's dirty laundry, insisting these were only temporary hardships. On May 9, 2019, around 4 p.m., the phone rang in the Lama household. Anjana's mother picked it up and heard the trembling voice of her in-law, who pleaded with her to come to the Mahat home immediately. The woman was crying and couldn't give clear answers. She just kept asking them to hurry. It was immediately clear that something terrible had happened. Although the distance between the two homes was just over 60 miles, a traffic accident on the highway caused massive delays. What should have taken about an hour ended up being a grueling 6-hour drive. By the time Anjana's parents arrived, the Mahat residence was surrounded by police cars and a growing crowd of onlookers, including neighbors and passers-by. Near the entrance, Anjana's younger brother sat with his back against the wall, his hands covering his face as he sobbed uncontrollably. It was clear that something irreversible had taken place, but the full scope was still unknown. One of the officers approached Anjana's father and asked him to come inside. Together they walked up to a second-floor bedroom. What he saw next was so traumatic, so deeply disturbing, that it would haunt him for the rest of his life. Lying on the bed was the brutally disfigured body of his beloved daughter. The grief was overwhelming, his vision blurred by tears, his breath caught in his throat. He stumbled out the house, barely able to process what he had just witnessed. His wife, seeing the agony on his face, instantly understood. Their daughter was gone. What had happened to Anjana wasn't just a crime, it was a calculated and brutal act. Her left hand had been severed entirely and lay on the floor. Her left leg above the knee had been almost completely detached with a single blow from a sharp weapon. Her head was barely connected to her body, and her face was so badly injured that it was nearly unrecognizable. Devastated by what had happened, Anjana's parents demanded that the police arrest every member of the Mahat household, accusing them of conspiracy and involvement in the crime. But what they heard next from the officers left them stunned. The person responsible had already confessed, was in custody, and was providing a full statement at the station. The person behind the act was Ujwal, the same man who had once helped the young couple elope, and whom Anjana had trusted as both a brother figure and a close friend. It turned out that under constant pressure from his wife, Ujwal had become convinced that Anjana was manipulative and greedy, determined to destroy the family and take Prajwal away to another country. With his declining health and lack of work, Ujwal dwelled on these thoughts every day. Eventually, his resentment boiled over. He began to see Anjana's cheerful demeanor and her preparations to move abroad as deeply offensive, and hatred took hold. On the day the tragedy occurred, Prajwal, his father, and Aishwarya had all gone to work. Santosh and Anjana's younger brother were at school. At home were only Anjana, Ujwal, and their mother, Pushpa, who wasn't feeling well and had gone to lie down. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Around noon, Anjana stepped outside to fill a container with water from the outdoor tap, so she could water her beloved flowers near the house. She was in high spirits, humming a tune and dancing as she moved. From the balcony above, Ujwal watched her intently, trying to decide how to carry out what he had already resolved to do. When Anjana came back inside, she went to her bedroom and lay down with her phone in hand. Meanwhile, Ujwal was choosing his weapon. First, he picked up a large kitchen knife, but after handling it briefly, he decided it wasn't enough. He then went to the storage room where, among the tools, was a kukri, a large curved traditional Nepali blade used by Gurkha soldiers. Armed with the kukri, Ujwal went upstairs and entered Anjana's room. She, still focused on her phone, casually asked what he needed. Instead of answering, he approached the bed. It wasn't until he raised the weapon that she realized something was terribly wrong. She instinctively raised her arm to shield herself, and the first blow severed her hand. Despite her screams and the horrific scene unfolding, Ujwal continued his attack, striking repeatedly. He didn't stop until he was sure there was no chance of survival. The final blow severed her head, leaving no doubt about the brutality of the act. The room was soaked in blood, as was Ujwal himself. Forensic experts later counted more than 15 wounds on her body, most of them fatal even on their own. After the violent attack, Ujwal went to his mother's bedroom and calmly told her what he had done. In complete shock, she decided her first priority was to protect her son. She immediately called her husband and asked him to come home right away. Together, they contacted the police, but when officers arrived, the couple tried to pretend they didn't know the victim. It may have sounded naive or even absurd at first, but given the condition of the remains, identifying the victim was nearly impossible. However, police quickly narrowed down who the body likely belonged to. They refused to move forward without formal identification and requested that Anjana's parents come in for the process. Despite the devastating injuries, her father immediately recognized his daughter. Suspicion initially fell on all members of the Mahat household, but Ujwal, realizing the legal danger his family faced, chose to confess. He claimed full responsibility, stating that he acted alone and that no one else in the home knew of his intentions. He gave a detailed account of what had happened, turned over the weapon used, and even handed in his blood-soaked clothes. In a disturbing twist, Ujwal had become so consumed by what he was doing that he failed to notice he had severed part of his own finger. It apparently happened during the final moments of the act, and he only realized the injury after stepping out of the room, trying to decide what to do next. Anjana's parents had long known about the toxic environment in her marital home. They were aware that Aishwarya, her brother-in-law's wife, held deep animosity toward her and had influenced others in the household against her. They believed she may have played a role in fueling Ujwal's anger and driving him to commit the crime. The Lama family demanded that Aishwarya also be arrested for incitement, but authorities declined. Ujwal continued to insist he acted alone and bore full responsibility. Ujwal's wealthy parents hired one of the top attorneys in the country, sparing no expense in hopes of reducing the consequences their son faced. They were willing to go to great lengths to protect their eldest, even if it meant interfering with the justice process. Prajwal, however, stood firmly with Anjana's grieving parents. He demanded the harshest penalty for his brother, refusing to accept what had happened. The betrayal was immense. This was the same man who had once supported his marriage, shown kindness to Anjana, and played a key role in their early happiness. Prajwal simply couldn't comprehend how someone so close to them could transform into someone capable of such cruelty. What hurt him most was seeing his parents rally behind the person responsible. Their loyalty to Ujwal and their efforts to shield him from justice felt like a betrayal of both their daughter-in-law and their surviving son. Feeling abandoned by his own family, Prajwal joined Anjana's parents in their fight for justice. The attorney hired by the Mahat family worked tirelessly to delay the proceedings and protect his client. But Ujwal remained firm in his original confession, afraid that any change in his story might draw his wife or parents into the case. It took 2 full years for a verdict to be reached. When the trial finally concluded, Ujwal was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the story didn't end there. Ujwal, along with his legal team, filed an appeal, this time with a new legal strategy, hoping for a different outcome. This time, The defense attorney claimed that his client was suffering from a psychological condition that had worsened due to his hearing loss and the emotional toll of losing his career. The court ordered a series of psychiatric evaluations to assess the validity of the claim. However, after thorough examination, mental health professionals concluded that Ujwal was mentally stable, fully aware of his actions, and capable of understanding their consequences. As a result, the original sentence was upheld, and Ujwal was sent to prison to serve his life sentence, without the possibility of parole. As for Prajwal, he remained in Nepal until the legal process was over. He stood by Anjana's grieving parents, offering them support, and even testified in court against his own brother. Once the final verdict was delivered and justice had been served, Prajwal left the country. He flew to Canada, fulfilling the dream he and Anjana had once shared together. Case 3. When people live together for a long time, it's not uncommon for them to reach a breaking point in their relationship. During these periods, tensions often rise and mutual accusations start flying, claims of manipulation, toxicity, controlling behavior, and even narcissism. But while some of these struggles may pass with time or counseling, there are situations where one partner, often a woman, remains trapped in a deeply destructive dynamic, facing emotional and physical mistreatment day after day. The real question is, how can we tell the difference between a temporary crisis and a situation where someone is in real danger? The Summers family case became one of the most complex and debated legal battles in recent years, taking over 5 years to reach a conclusion. On the surface, they appeared to be a happy, united household, by all accounts, a picture-perfect American family. But behind closed doors, what unfolded was something far more disturbing. What seemed like an ordinary domestic situation hid a reality so unsettling, many struggled to accept it was even possible. As the story unraveled, it was revealed that when the head of the family was faced with divorce proceedings initiated by his spouse, he refused to accept the separation. Instead, he devised a calculated plan to retaliate, one that went far beyond typical legal disputes. He manipulated his own sons and daughters into taking part in his scheme, turning them into instruments of control and convincing them that their actions were in the best interest of the family. Alyssa Jill Summers was born on February 18, 1980, in a suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She grew up in a modest, middle-class household. In 1995, at the age of 15, she met a boy named Trevor Stephen Summers, who was 2 years older. They both attended the same high school, often ran into each other outside of class, and shared many mutual friends. Their connection began as a friendship, hanging out at gatherings, talking between classes, and spending time with other students. As time went on, they grew closer, discovering shared interests and similar outlooks on life. However, they didn't start officially dating until 2 years after they first met. Their relationship developed gradually. Both were focused on finishing school and figuring out their paths in life. Their parents supported the relationship and approved of the person their son or daughter had chosen. Friends and classmates admired them as a sweet, balanced couple, sociable, kind, cheerful, and loved by many. They enjoyed planning thoughtful surprises for those around them, and were often the center of attention in their friend groups, with some people even quietly envying their happiness. In 2001, for years after their romance began, they tied the knot. Alyssa was 21, and Trevor had just turned 23. By then, they had already been through enough to feel confident in starting a life together. Everyone believed they were headed for a long, happy marriage. The newlyweds moved into a modest home in Philadelphia and quickly began building a life together. In 2003, they welcomed their first daughter, Arden. 3 years later, Alyssa gave birth to their son, Landon. Over the next several years, their family grew to include 3 more, daughter Bree and sons Grady and Cooper. Alyssa chose to put her career on hold and devoted herself to raising their 5 kids and managing the household full-time. From the outside, the Summers appeared to be the definition of a happy, tight-knit family, and to be fair, in the early years, that was the reality. But as time went on, things began to change, and not for the better. Trevor had taken on the role of sole provider early in their marriage, and as the family expanded, the pressure on him only increased. Alyssa was a full-time stay-at-home mom, and the financial responsibilities fell squarely on Trevor's shoulders. In 2004, they moved to Florida, where he launched a landscaping company. But the business struggled from the start and eventually shut down just 3 years later. Following that, the family relocated to Alabama. There, Trevor opened a small used car rental and sales shop. Despite his efforts, that venture also failed. Every couple of years, the Summers family packed their belongings and moved to a new state, so Trevor could attempt yet another business. But time after time, those attempts ended in failure. Over more than a decade, Trevor dabbled in a wide range of ventures: real estate, pool maintenance, flower and souvenir sales. But failure seemed to follow him at every turn. Each attempt left him deeper in debt, yet Alyssa never lost faith in him. She stood by his side, offering unwavering support through every setback. No matter where they moved, the couple remained outgoing and friendly, quickly building new circles of acquaintances. Their home was always open to guests. Alyssa cooked warm, home-style meals, while Trevor enthusiastically pitched his next business idea, assuring everyone that this time it would work, that this project would finally bring them success. But as their household grew, it became harder and harder to make ends meet. Due to a poor credit history, Trevor was repeatedly denied loans. And aside from Alyssa and their sons and daughters, no one really believed in his entrepreneurial dreams. He even asked relatives to co-sign loans, but most dismissed him as unreliable. In truth, Trevor struggled to commit to any one path and kept hopping from one idea to another, hoping that something would eventually pay off. In 2015, the family returned to Florida, this time planning to settle down for good. The constant moves had taken a toll. Arden and her siblings struggled to adjust to new schools, couldn't make lasting friendships, and were under a great deal of stress from the instability. The parents eventually decided to switch them to homeschooling, thinking it would solve the problem and offer some consistency. Their eldest daughter Arden helped Alyssa manage the household, and often looked after her younger brothers and sisters. She had always been what people might call a daddy's girl. Incredibly close to Trevor, she trusted him completely and saw him as the best parent in the world. But over time, the dynamic within the family began to shift. Although things were deteriorating, Alyssa continued to pretend everything was fine. As Trevor's business ventures kept failing, he became more frustrated, anxious, and at times displayed troubling behavior. He started fearing that Alyssa might leave him for someone more successful or financially secure. These thoughts began to consume him. Eventually, Trevor's behavior became increasingly controlling and domineering. He started accusing Alyssa of being unfaithful without any evidence. He grew suspicious of her every move, became jealous of anyone she spoke to, friends, neighbors, even casual acquaintances. Simple greetings on the street would spark confrontation. As tensions grew, Trevor demanded she delete her social media account and forbade her from creating new ones. He regularly checked her phone, reviewed her call logs and messages, and insisted that she remove every male contact, even longtime family friends. He also began controlling what she wore. At first, he told her not to wear certain outfits he considered too revealing, even though they weren't. Then he took over choosing her clothes entirely, forbidding her from using makeup and insisting she wear only modest, dull, and conservative outfits. Fragrances and any kind of jewelry, aside from her wedding ring, were no longer allowed. Trevor didn't stop there. He continued to tighten his control over Alyssa in every aspect of her life. He banned her from driving, took away her phone, and eventually stopped letting her leave the house entirely. Whenever he stepped out, he would lock her inside along with the younger sons and daughters. The only one allowed to come and go freely was their eldest daughter, Arden. Trevor often took her with him and tried to convince her that everything he was doing was for the good of the family. The head of the household monitored every detail of their lives. He knew where each family member was, what they were doing, who they spoke to, and what they ate. It seemed this control gave him a sense of power and satisfaction. Alyssa, more than anyone else, bore the brunt of this environment. She was constantly criticized, emotionally pressured, and blamed for everything that went wrong in Trevor's life. After 15 years of marriage, Alyssa finally told Trevor she wanted a divorce. She said she couldn't continue living under such oppressive conditions. His reaction was immediate and cruel. He slapped her across the face, hurled insults, and told her she was worthless, that no one would want her as a single mom. From that moment, the household rules became even more restrictive. Around the same time, Trevor came under police investigation for financial misconduct and was placed under house arrest. Being trapped in the house with him became unbearable for Alyssa. It was during this time that she realized she could no longer share a home with this person. In October 2016, Alyssa found herself once again confined within the walls of their home. For 2 full weeks, Trevor didn't allow her to set foot outside. The situation had become extremely dangerous, and he watched her constantly. With no access to the outside world, Alyssa had no way to seek help or even alert anyone to her circumstances. Then came a narrow window of opportunity. One day, Trevor, no longer under investigation, left the house for a few hours. During his absence, Alyssa managed to find a phone and called emergency services. She reported ongoing mistreatment and said that her husband had been keeping her locked up. The call was cut short when Trevor returned unexpectedly, but authorities had already recorded the address and dispatched officers immediately. Law enforcement arrived at the Summers residence just as Trevor had resumed verbally and emotionally berating his wife. It's important to note that he had learned to avoid leaving visible injuries. His methods were primarily psychological, though he occasionally used physical intimidation, slaps, pulling her by the hair. His most common form of punishment, however, involved inappropriate personal behavior that was never discussed openly. When the officers showed up at the door, Trevor appeared surprised and hesitant to let them in. Wanting to avoid arrest, he eventually agreed to let Alyssa and the children go. He claimed that no one had ever been held against their will and insisted that Alyssa was simply an unreliable person who couldn't be trusted. After escaping her controlling husband, Alyssa faced a new and immediate problem. She and her sons and daughters had nowhere to go. They left with no belongings and no money. Following the advice of law enforcement, Alyssa reached out to a local support service for individuals affected by domestic conflict. There, she and the kids were provided with temporary shelter, meals, and essential supplies. Alyssa wasted no time. She began actively searching for a job, and before long, her efforts paid off. She was hired by a local company and soon managed to rent a modest but cozy home. Slowly but surely, she and her children started rebuilding their lives in a new environment. Despite facing a number of challenges, they were moving forward and things began to stabilize. At the same time, Alyssa filed for divorce. Wanting to avoid further conflict and preserve a sense of peace for the sake of her sons and daughters, she chose not to press formal charges against Trevor for his past actions. She hoped the separation could be finalized without hostility. Initially, Trevor tried to contact her repeatedly, urging her to come back. But after some time, he seemed to accept the situation and backed off, at least on the surface. It wasn't until 6 months after the separation that Alyssa finally began to feel a sense of freedom. For the first time in years, she started to live without constantly looking over her shoulder. She even began to open up to new people, hoping to rebuild her personal life. During this time, she met a man named Jeffrey Matheson, and by the spring of 2017, their friendship had grown into a romantic relationship. Once the divorce was finalized, the former couple agreed on a shared custody arrangement. The sons and daughters would primarily live with Alyssa, while Trevor could visit them twice a week and take them for overnight stays on weekends. The arrangement seemed reasonable to everyone involved. While Alyssa was not thrilled to interact with Trevor, she didn't object, preferring to keep things calm and civil. Trevor appeared composed, showed no signs of aggression, and successfully lulled Alyssa into believing he had moved on. Then, in March 2017, he called her unexpectedly. He asked her to come over to sign a few papers related to their divorce and property division. His tone was polite, and nothing about the request raised suspicion. Alyssa drove over to his house. Trevor greeted her at the door and invited her in. As soon as the door closed behind her, his demeanor changed completely. It quickly became clear there were no documents. This was a setup. The whole request had been a ruse to get her to his house alone, without their sons and daughters present. At first, Trevor tried to convince her to reconcile and live together again, but when Alyssa firmly refused, he became threatening. He accused her of betrayal, hurled insults, and refused to let her leave. He demanded she admit to things that never happened, fixating on imaginary wrongs. When Alyssa attempted to walk away, Trevor grabbed a large hunting knife, the kind used for field dressing game, and held it to her throat. Then he lowered it to her chest and said he would take her heart out. Alyssa was frozen in fear. Trevor, meanwhile, seemed to take disturbing pleasure in the situation, describing in detail what he wanted to do next. Trevor held his ex-wife captive for nearly 2 hours, hours that felt like an eternity to Alyssa. The entire time, she pleaded with him to stop and think clearly, reminding him that if he hurt her, he'd end up in prison, and their sons and daughters would be left without either parent. She begged him not to make them orphans. Surprisingly, her words seemed to have an effect. Trevor paused, thought it over, and ultimately decided to let her go. But before he did, he made Alyssa promise she would never tell anyone what had happened. She gave her word. However, the moment she was far enough from the house, she contacted law enforcement and reported the threats and aggression. Trevor was arrested that same evening. Still, he denied everything, calling Alyssa a habitual liar and accusing her of betrayal and manipulation. There were no visible marks on her body, her clothing remained intact, and without physical evidence, it was hard to prove the assault had taken place. It became a case of her word against his. With no hard evidence, Trevor was released, though both he and Alyssa filed for mutual restraining orders. After the incident, Trevor shifted his focus to the children. He began trying to manipulate them emotionally, insisting that Alyssa was the only reason the family had fallen apart. Every time he saw them, he talked about how much he missed their mom and wished things could go back to how they were. He took them to places the family used to visit on vacations or weekends, trying to rekindle old memories and create a sense of longing. The kids, young and emotionally vulnerable, believed their father wanted what was best for everyone. They saw him as kind and well-intentioned. The one most affected was the eldest daughter, Arden, who had always idolized Trevor and saw him as a flawless parent. Trevor counted on her loyalty and made her the centerpiece of his plan. It's important to note that the children had never been subjected to harsh behavior from Trevor. Because of this, they didn't recognize the risk he posed. Alyssa, trying to protect their mental health, had never spoken poorly of their father. Fearing emotional harm or confusion, that silence made it easier for Trevor to manipulate them. At his request, the kids began keeping tabs on their mother, watching her, reporting back about daily routines, and sharing what she said or did. Working with Arden, Trevor started developing a plan, not for reconciliation, as he claimed, but for revenge. On Saturday, March 11, 2017, Trevor picked up the younger kids for their scheduled weekend stay. But later that night, he returned to Alyssa's house with the car lights off and parked on the side of the home. He waited patiently for a signal from Arden, who was supposed to crack open Alyssa's bedroom window and let him know when she and the middle kids had gone to bed. Once he saw the agreed signal, Trevor told the younger ones to stay quiet in the car, saying he was about to surprise their mom. Then he slipped into the house through the unlocked window. In the dark, he ambushed Alyssa. He dragged her out to the living room, took her phone, and used a cable tie to bind her wrists. When the frightened children followed after them, Trevor told them to go back to their room and assured them everything would be okay. After restraining Alyssa, Trevor turned to Arden, his 14-year-old daughter, and instructed her to take her siblings and drive them to his house using his vehicle. Although Arden didn't have a driver's license yet, Trevor insisted it was necessary and told her she could handle it. He reassured her that he and her mom would follow shortly in Alyssa's SUV, and that from that night on, their family would be back together. Once the car with the younger kids pulled away, Trevor returned to Alyssa to subject her to hours of unimaginable suffering. He injected her with a sedative he had prepared in advance, aiming to weaken her resistance. When the drug took effect, he dragged her into the bedroom, restrained her to the bed, and committed a disturbing act of aggression. Alyssa drifted in and out of consciousness, but Trevor deliberately kept her alert, ensuring she was aware of everything happening. While she lay helpless, he began speaking about having large sums of money in offshore accounts, and claimed he had purchased a yacht. His supposed plan was to take her and the children away to a remote location where no one would ever find them. He told her the family belonged to him and that he wasn't letting anyone go. Meanwhile, Arden had managed to drive safely to her father's house with her brothers and sisters. Fortunately, it was late at night and the roads were empty, which helped the young teen avoid any accidents. She parked in the driveway, and the kids went inside, waiting for their parents, who never showed up. Around 5 a.m., Trevor began suffocating Alyssa with a pillow, tightening it around her face, then briefly letting go so she could catch her breath, only to start again. This terrifying pattern continued for about 30 minutes until Alyssa, physically and emotionally broken, agreed to comply with whatever he demanded. He then untied her, placed her in the car, and drove off down a quiet road leading out of town. At about 6 a.m., a car pulled into the parking lot of a small, 24-hour convenience store on the outskirts of the city. A man exited the vehicle and walked into the store. Just minutes later, a barefoot, partially clothed woman with her hands bound managed to escape from the passenger seat. She ran toward an employee who was standing outside, begging for help. Suddenly, the man came rushing back out of the store, grabbed Alyssa mid-run, and forced her back into the car. The vehicle sped off before the stunned witness could react, but he had seen enough to understand that he had just witnessed an abduction. Thankfully, he managed to remember the make, color, and even the license plate number of the vehicle, and quickly provided that information to authorities. Law enforcement tracked the car owner using the license plate. What they discovered raised immediate concern. The name was linked to an active restraining order, a volatile divorce, and reports of controlling behavior. The top priority became locating the sons and daughters to ensure their safety. They were found at Trevor's home, but none of them knew where their parents were or what was happening. They were confused and had no understanding of the terrifying events unfolding elsewhere. The young witnesses were interviewed one by one with care, and what they revealed painted a disturbing picture of life inside the Summers household. The sons and daughters hadn't realized the severity of what had been happening around them. They were never on the receiving end of their father's actions, so his controlling behavior and mistreatment of their mother seemed like just a regular part of life. But the details they shared made it clear. Alyssa was in danger and had to be found as soon as possible. At that point, Trevor and his hostage were already far from the city, heading toward an isolated area near the coastline. He stopped at a small hotel they had visited as a family. Lost in memories for a moment, his demeanor suddenly shifted. Trevor said he had figured out a solution. He pulled out a notebook and pen and began writing what appeared to be a farewell letter. Then, dissatisfied, he tore out the page, crumpled it, and started over. This continued for hours. Alyssa realized that he was planning to end her life, and then his own, using the letter to explain it all to their sons and daughters. After Alyssa's failed escape attempt in the supermarket parking lot, surveillance cameras had caught glimpses of their car, helping authorities narrow down the direction they were heading. The search lasted 55 hours. During that time, Trevor wrote multiple farewell notes and used a razor blade to cut Alyssa's wrist in an attempt to make it look like she had harmed herself voluntarily. Eventually, Trevor brought her to Little Harbor, a coastal resort town. There, he once again violated her and told her they would soon be leaving the world together. He put a makeshift cord around Alyssa's neck and began strangling her, but just then, the sound of sirens echoed nearby. Trevor let go and bolted for the car, flooring the gas pedal in an attempt to flee, only to drive straight into the path of a police cruiser. Realizing he had no way out, Trevor grabbed the razor and tried to harm himself, managing only superficial cuts. Fortunately, officers arrived just in time. They disarmed him, pulled him from the vehicle, and rescued Alyssa. Both were transported to the hospital for emergency medical attention. Following his arrest, Trevor denied all wrongdoing. He claimed Alyssa had voluntarily gone with him, and even alleged that she had asked him to tie her up, choke her, and engage in violent behavior, framing it as part of some shared interest in danger and control. Unsurprisingly, no one believed him. Prosecutors filed 11 charges against him, including abduction, assault, and attempted murder. The legal process dragged on, and with the onset of the pandemic in 2020, the trial was delayed indefinitely. Fortunately, Trevor was denied bail and remained behind bars, where he stayed for nearly 5 years awaiting trial. During that time, Alyssa found a new beginning. She married her partner Jeffrey Matheson, who stepped in to help raise her sons and daughters as his own. Despite Trevor and his attorney's efforts to convince the court of his innocence, the evidence overwhelmingly told a different story. Among the most damning items were the numerous farewell notes discovered in the vehicle, testimony from the eyewitness who saw the attempted escape, the makeshift ligature used to strangle Alyssa, and the bloodied razor blade found at the scene. In the spring of 2022, Trevor Summers was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms with no possibility of parole. The testimony that proved most crucial in reaching a guilty verdict came from his own sons and daughters, who bravely shared what they witnessed during that horrifying ordeal. For the first time, they fully understood just how close their mother had come to losing her life. Case 4. In April 2015, deep in a wooded area near the town of Penn, Maharashtra, a local man was out gathering firewood when he stumbled upon a large black plastic bag. It was partially covered with soil and dry leaves. As he got closer, he was hit by an overwhelming odor, something that smelled like a mix of burning and decay. Alarmed, he immediately contacted local emergency services. A response team from the Penn district quickly arrived at the scene. Inside the bag were human remains. The body had been burned so severely that neither the face nor any identifying physical features were recognizable. The skull, pelvis, and a few long bones were intact, but there were no clothes, documents, or personal belongings found. Based on the condition of the remains, It was clear that a significant amount of time had passed since the individual's life had ended. Traces of what was believed to be gasoline were discovered at the scene, suggesting an intentional attempt to destroy the body. The secluded location and nature of the discovery left little doubt. This was an intentional act meant to erase evidence. Authorities sent the remains to a forensic lab in Mumbai, but nothing matched with any records in the missing persons database. No reports filed in Mumbai or nearby districts aligned with the description or estimated time frame. With no identity, no family inquiries, and no leads, the case was officially logged as an unidentified individual found in a rural area. It was classified as unresolved. For the first few weeks, the case remained active. However, the lack of evidence, suspects, or community tips eventually led investigators to archive the file. Interest faded. Without an ID, there was no clear direction for the case to move. No further forensic testing was ordered. The case slowly disappeared from public memory. That's how things stood for almost 3 years, until 2015, when during questioning for an entirely separate criminal investigation, a detainee suddenly mentioned he knew who the person burned in the Pen Forest had been. It wasn't a confession of guilt or remorse, it was a calculated move. He offered the information in exchange for leniency in his own case. Until that point, no one had any idea whose remains had been found in that bag. Sheena Bora was born in 1987 in Shillong, the capital city of the Indian state of Meghalaya. It's a densely populated urban area, and at the time, her mother Indrani Bora and father Siddhartha Das were both very young. Their relationship had been unstable from the beginning, and the arrival of a baby didn't change things. Neither parent seemed willing to take full responsibility for raising their daughter. Shortly after Sheena's birth, the family welcomed a second child, a son named Mikhail. Despite now having 2 children, the relationship between Indrani and Siddhartha deteriorated quickly. They separated soon after Mikhail was born, leaving both siblings in the care of Indrani's parents, their maternal grandparents. Sheena and Mikhail continued living in the home of their elderly relatives. Technically, neither parent had officially relinquished their rights, but in reality, it was their maternal grandparents who took full responsibility for raising them. The household's financial situation was modest, but the siblings' basic needs were met. They had food, shelter, education, and daily care. Siddhartha Das, their father, played no role in their upbringing. He vanished completely from their lives. Indrani, their mother, relocated to the city of Kolkata, where she enrolled in university. From that moment on, she severed ties, not only with her family, but also with her son and daughter. She provided no support, didn't reach out, and showed no concern for their well-being. To those she left behind, it was as if she had erased her past completely. Despite the absence of their parents, the grandparents did their best. The siblings went to school, and their guardians tried to explain that their parents were simply busy, that it was necessary. But as Sheena got older, she began to understand the truth. Her mother had willingly walked away from her. Her father had disappeared without a trace. During her teenage years, Sheena began to harbor feelings of hurt and disappointment. She struggled to understand why her mother had chosen education and career over making space for her in her life. With her departure, Indrani had effectively broken free from her former world. After graduating from college in Kolkata, she rapidly reinvented herself. She married Sanjeev Khanna, a businessman from the same city. This was her first official marriage. Together, they launched a company and became deeply involved in building their business. Sanjeev was already financially established, and this marriage gave Indrani an entry point into a higher social circle. They had a daughter together. However, the relationship soon unraveled. Disagreements, personal conflicts, and a power struggle within the business eventually led to a split. In 2002, their marriage was formally dissolved, though they retained joint ownership of parts of their company. After the divorce, Indrani did not return to the home where Sheena and Mikhail were still living. Instead, she moved to Mumbai. Mumbai is India's largest city and its financial capital, a place where banks, media networks, stock exchanges, and corporate headquarters dominate the skyline. But side by side with this world of luxury, high-rises, exotic cars, and elite private clubs, exists another Mumbai, home to some of Asia's most densely populated informal settlements, lacking basic services like electricity and sanitation. The contrast between wealth and hardship is stark. It was against this backdrop that Indrani Mukherjee began yet another chapter in her life. She entered into a new relationship, this time with Peter Mukherjee, a media executive who was then serving as the CEO of a major television network. Their connection quickly evolved into marriage. After her divorce from Sanjeev, Indrani brought her daughter Vidhi with her to live with Peter. Eventually, Vidhi was legally adopted by him. With Peter, Indrani cemented her position in Mumbai's elite circles, both in business and high society. This marriage proved pivotal for her, granting access to powerful connections and elevated status. In her new life, Indrani concealed her entire past, including the existence of her children from previous relationships. In her new world, Indrani had completely detached from her past. No one in her professional or social circles had any idea that Sheena and Mikhail even existed. She never mentioned them, neither in business meetings nor in personal conversations. In the official version of her life, there were no children from a previous chapter. Even her own parents, still living in Shillong, had no idea where she was, whom she had married, or what ventures she was involved in. In the upscale areas of Mumbai, Indrani carefully crafted the image of a powerful, independent woman. She attended exclusive events, hosted private gatherings, networked with investors and media executives. She was known in business circles as the co-founder of successful companies and the wife of one of the most influential figures in the media industry. She was welcomed at high-end clubs, private screenings, and international conferences. But beneath this polished exterior, personal truths were deliberately hidden. The most important condition for maintaining this new reality was to keep her past entirely concealed, especially when it came to Sheena. No one from Indrani's current circle could find out that she had a grown daughter from a previous relationship. Even Peter, her husband at the time, wasn't fully aware of the truth. Indrani claimed that Sheena was her younger sister, whom she had raised. Their first contact didn't occur until 2006, when Sheena, now a young adult, took the initiative to reach out. But more on that later. One likely reason for Indrani's secrecy was concern over her reputation. In the social circle she now moved in, the revelation that she had adult children from a previous relationship could be seen as damaging or inconsistent with the polished narrative she had built. Another possible motive may have been financial. If Sheena were legally acknowledged as her daughter, she might have a claim to assets or inheritance that Indrani wasn't willing to share. By 2006, Sheena was 19. She had finished school and began thinking seriously about her future. Her grandparents were still doing their best, but their financial situation hadn't improved. Higher education was out of reach, and her younger brother Mikhail needed care. He was dealing with health issues. Their mother had remained out of contact for years. But on her birthday, Sheena managed to find Indrani's phone number and made the bold decision to call. The conversation lasted a while. For the first time in years, Sheena heard the voice of the world and then vanished. Indrani shared that she was now living in Mumbai, married, with a new family and a thriving career. She didn't explain why she had disappeared, didn't apologize, and didn't offer any reflection on the past. The conversation was polite but emotionally distant, yet it marked a turning point. Sheena expressed a desire to reconnect. She wanted to rebuild their relationship. Indrani didn't agree right away. Sometime later, she said she was open to having Sheena move to Mumbai, but under one condition: no one in her life could know that Sheena was her daughter. She would have to present herself as her younger sister. Indrani gave no further explanation for this demand. At first glance, the offer looked like an opportunity to change the course of her life. Mumbai, a major metropolis, was full of potential. For Sheena, it meant the possibility of getting an education and starting fresh. But the condition her mother set came with a heavy price. Sheena would have to give up her identity. Moving to a city where she would not be acknowledged as a daughter and would be asked to conceal the truth about herself was a painful decision. Still, Sheena agreed. She longed for change, yearned for connection with her mother, and hoped to escape the difficult circumstances she had grown up in. Sheena left Shillong and relocated to Mumbai. That's where she was met by Indrani. Officially, Indrani introduced Sheena to everyone as her younger sister. In her new social circle, this explanation was accepted without question. Within Peter Mukherjee's family, Indrani's second husband, no one knew who Sheena really was. Even Peter himself believed she was simply Indrani's sister. Sheena enrolled in a university, balancing her studies with the quiet hope of building some sort of relationship with her mother. They lived in the same city and saw each other occasionally, but their bond remained distant. Indrani kept strict control over how they interacted. Deviating from the younger sister narrative was absolutely off limits. Talking about the past was not allowed. Any attempts to bring up her childhood, her brother Mikhail, or their grandparents were treated as crossing a line. At first, Sheena tried to accept the situation. Her new life gave her access to things she never had before, an education, housing, and basic security. But the role she was forced to play wore her down. Her identity was denied, her place as a daughter was erased. Even though her mother was nearby, their relationship remained guarded and emotionally distant. Indrani kept her emotional distance. She showed no warmth, avoided talking about the past, and offered no emotional support. Her focus was fully on her new family. Sheena often felt like an outsider. Meanwhile, Indrani never discussed how long Sheena would stay in Mumbai, or what the future might hold. Her support was unofficial and inconsistent. Anytime Sheena brought up living conditions, finances, or plans for the future, she was met with a cold response. Sheena realized she was entirely dependent on someone who didn't even want to acknowledge her existence. Still, she didn't leave. She held on to the hope that things would change over time. Living in a big city, studying, and being physically close to her mother meant a lot to her. She believed that, eventually, Indrani might open up. Even a small gesture of emotional closeness would have meant everything. Sheena wasn't asking for public recognition. She just wanted to be accepted quietly, as part of the family. At the house where Sheena occasionally visited, lived Peter Mukherjee's son, Rahul. He was a young adult, independent in many ways, but still residing in the family home. From their earliest encounters, Sheena and Rahul clicked. Their connection developed quickly. They were the same age, attended similar universities, and had overlapping interests. Both felt the pressure of growing up under strong-willed parents. In a household filled with boundaries and formal relationships, their friendship offered a rare sense of freedom. Before long, they were spending a lot of time together, well beyond the scope of family visits. Their relationship turned romantic. At first, Indrani didn't notice the growing closeness. Sheena and Rahul were often seen together in a family context, and nothing seemed unusual. But once it became clear that their connection was personal, Indrani's behavior changed dramatically. She strongly objected and demanded that they end the relationship immediately. The official reason she gave was that such relationships within a family, even without any biological ties, created tension. Indrani argued it was inappropriate from both a moral and social standpoint. But there were deeper motives behind her reaction. She understood that a romantic relationship between Sheena and Rahul could lead to the truth coming out. If things became serious, Sheena might reveal her real identity. That would shatter the carefully constructed illusion and have serious consequences, both personally and professionally. Indrani began trying to influence Sheena, first by persuasion, then insistence, and eventually through pressure. At one point, she even limited their contact entirely by sending Sheena to stay with her grandparents in Shillong. Indrani hoped the distance would break the bond between Sheena and Rahul. But the result was the opposite. Time apart only strengthened their connection. Rahul stayed in touch. They texted, talked regularly, and made plans for the future. When Sheena returned to Mumbai, she was no longer financially dependent on her mother. Rahul helped her with housing and supported her with day-to-day expenses. This gave Sheena more independence and weakened Indrani's control over her. Despite being told to end the relationship, Sheena didn't, and Rahul still had no idea about the real family dynamic. He believed Sheena was Indrani's younger sister. To him, they were equals in a genuine relationship, and he had no reason to suspect their connection threatened to expose a hidden truth. On April 24, 2012, Sheena arranged to meet Indrani. According to Indrani, the plan was to have dinner together. Although their relationship had been tense, Sheena still wanted to maintain contact. She hoped this meeting might be a step toward rebuilding their bond. That day, Sheena had work. After her shift ended, Rahul picked her up. They spent a few hours together. Sheena told him she was meeting Indrani later that evening. Rahul dropped her off at the agreed location, a restaurant where the meeting was supposed to happen. He walked her to the spot, said goodbye, and watched her approach a car where Indrani was waiting. The driver was in the front seat, and another person was seated inside, but Rahul didn't recognize them. Sheena got into the car. Rahul stood and watched as the vehicle drove off. At that point, there was nothing alarming. He knew she was going to see Indrani, and there was no reason to be concerned. But later that night, Sheena didn't return. Rahul started calling her, but she didn't answer. After some time, he received a text message. It said everything was fine, and that she was staying overnight at Indrani's. But Rahul felt uneasy. The tone of the message was unusual. Sheena typically wrote with warmth and emotion. This one felt cold and out of character. He replied, asking her to call or at least leave a voice message. No reply came. A few more hours passed. He sent another message, then called again. A new message came through, short and blunt. It claimed that Sheena was leaving, that she no longer wanted to continue their relationship, and asked him not to call or text again. She said he should forget about her. Rahul was stunned. Just days earlier, they had been discussing plans for the future. There had been no signs of tension, no arguments. He knew Sheena well, how she communicated, how she handled stress. This message didn't sound like her at all. He began to suspect that she hadn't written it. He kept trying to get in touch, but none of the calls were answered. His concern grew rapidly. He couldn't make sense of such a drastic change in behavior. Nothing added up, but one thing was clear to him. Whatever had happened, it began the moment she got into that car with Indrani. The morning after Sheena disappeared, Rahul took action. He tried reaching out to her mother. At first Indrani didn't respond to his calls. Eventually, she did get back to him. According to her, Sheena had told her she wanted to end the relationship with Rahul and leave the city. Indrani added that she had supposedly suggested Sheena take a break and go away for a while to escape the pressure. She claimed Sheena agreed and had traveled abroad. The explanation didn't sit right with Rahul. The abrupt end of their relationship, the sudden change of plans, and Sheena's complete disappearance, all in one night, seemed deeply suspicious. He kept trying to stay in touch, but each time he got the same story. A few days later he managed to speak with Peter Mukherjee. Peter repeated the same version, that Sheena had left voluntarily and didn't want to be contacted. Rahul didn't buy it. He went to the police. Officers listened to him, but refused to file a missing person report. They explained that Sheena was an adult, legally entitled to make her own decisions, and that disappearing wasn't, in itself, grounds for an investigation. They asked for evidence that she was in danger. Rahul showed them their recent text conversations, pointing out that the messages didn't sound like her. But it wasn't enough. He returned to the station several times over the following days. He asked them to run checks, trace her phone, contact her through network providers. The response was always the same. Without clear signs of a threat, the authorities wouldn't act. The officers stressed that they couldn't intervene unless there was proof of a direct risk to her safety. Days passed. Sheena stayed silent. No calls, no texts, not even a trace of activity on social media. Rahul tried to track her down himself. He called the university, her workplace, mutual friends. The answer was always the same. No one had seen her since she met with Indrani. He went back to the police, this time pleading to at least have her disappearance officially documented. They still wouldn't listen. No case was opened. Their position remained unchanged. An adult woman was free to leave on her own terms. Rahul didn't give up. He reached out to Sheena's grandparents in Shillong. They hadn't heard from her either. She hadn't called or sent any messages. They were worried, but didn't know what steps to take. They lacked the resources to do much. Her younger brother Mikhail also tried to understand what was going on. He called their mother, but got no clear answers. Weeks went by. More and more signs pointed to the fact that Sheena hadn't left on her own. No one had received any word from her. There was no evidence of travel or a change in residence. No airline had a record of her departure. Rahul was convinced something serious had happened to her the night she met Indrani. Still, the police took no action. There was no official search. No media coverage. Sheena's disappearance didn't make headlines. For most people, it simply didn't exist. Only 3 people raised alarms: Rahul, her brother, and her elderly grandparents in Shillong. Everyone else stayed silent. In 2015 in Mumbai, police arrested a man named Shyamvar Rai. He was taken into custody for illegally possessing and transporting firearms. During a search, officers found several unlicensed weapons in his possession. That gave law enforcement grounds to open a full criminal case. Initially, the arrest had no connection to Sheena Bora's disappearance. During questioning, realizing the potential severity of his situation, Rai offered to cooperate. He said he had information about a serious crime that had occurred in 2012. His words were specific. "I know who was responsible for what happened to a young woman." At first, officers didn't take him seriously until he gave details that pointed directly to the case of Sheena Bora. Rai revealed that he had worked as a personal driver for Indrani Mukherjee, the wife of media executive Peter Mukherjee, and that he often carried out private tasks for her. According to him, in April 2012, he witnessed and was involved in events connected to the disappearance of a young woman everyone believed to be Indrani's younger sister. But Rai stated that this wasn't true. The woman wasn't her sister at all, and her real relationship to Indrani had been intentionally hidden. On April 24, 2012, Indrani instructed Rai to drive to a specific location in Mumbai where Sheena was scheduled to meet her under the pretense of having dinner together. Rahul, unaware of any danger, had actually dropped Sheena off himself. Rai recalled seeing her get into the car. Inside were Indrani and Sanjeev. Prior to this, Rai said Indrani had mentioned a trip but hadn't shared any specifics. He sensed it was something unofficial and deliberately kept secret. During the ride, Sheena was offered a drink. A few minutes after consuming it, she began feeling unwell. She became disoriented and soon lost consciousness. Indrani instructed Rai to keep driving. The car headed toward the outskirts of the city. They eventually left Mumbai and traveled toward a forested area near the town of Pen. When the car stopped, Indrani and Sanjeev took over. Rai said Sanjeev held Sheena's body, while Indrani carried out the act that ended her life. He emphasized that Indrani seemed confident and showed no hesitation. It all took place in the back of the vehicle. Afterward, they placed her body in a large black plastic bag, which Rai had been told to keep in the trunk earlier that day. They then drove deeper into the woods. At night, with only minimal light, they stopped in a remote area far from any main road. Rai, following Indrani's instructions, helped carry the bag to a secluded spot. There, according to him, Indrani and Sanjeev poured a flammable liquid over the body and set it on fire. The flames quickly engulfed the bag. They waited until the fire had nearly burned out before all three left the scene. These events matched every detail of an unsolved case from 2012 involving unidentified remains found in a forest near Pen. Until Rai's confession, authorities had never connected those remains to Sheena's disappearance. His statement established the first direct link between the incident and people from Sheena's inner circle. Rai claimed he hadn't acted of his own free will. At the time, he was in a difficult financial situation and desperately needed money. He said Indrani promised to cover his family's medical expenses in exchange for his cooperation. Following Sheena's disappearance, Rahul never stopped searching for answers. Years went by, but he didn't give up. Neither Indrani's explanations nor the police's formal dismissals satisfied him. He always believed the story about Sheena voluntarily leaving town was false. He was certain the truth was being kept from him. Rahul began gathering evidence. He saved old messages, reached out to friends, and reviewed documents. Eventually, he got hold of Sheena's personal notes, in which she hinted at a difficult relationship with her mother and expressed fear that their secret could be exposed. She wrote about feeling pressured and about living under a false identity. Rahul pushed for a full investigation into her disappearance. He eventually succeeded in getting a DNA analysis ordered. The biological comparison confirmed what he had long suspected. Sheena wasn't Indrani's sister. She was her biological daughter. That revelation completely dismantled the public narrative Indrani had maintained for years. Clear motives began to emerge. Indrani was deeply afraid that the truth about having an adult daughter from a previous relationship would come out. In the social circles she moved in, where image and status were everything, such a revelation could threaten her entire standing. Peter didn't know the truth. Their marriage was built on a carefully curated version of her past. On top of that, there were financial implications. If Sheena were officially recognized as her daughter, she would have had a legal right to a portion of Indrani's assets. That could affect not just Indrani, but also her younger daughter and Peter. Rahul, meanwhile, received no support. Peter's relatives were firmly against him. Indrani claimed he was trying to damage the family's reputation. The pressure extended beyond him. It also reached those around him. Still, he didn't back down. He became the only person consistently and publicly pushing to reopen the case. He reached out to the media, consulted with attorneys, and participated in public forums. He had facts, witness statements, documents, and forensic results. But he was up against wealth, power, and influence. After Shyamvar Rai's confession and detailed testimony, the investigation finally gained traction. In a short span of time, arrests were made. Indrani Mukherjee, her ex-husband Sanjeev Khanna, and Peter Mukherjee were taken into custody. The arrests were based on Rai's account, Sanjeev's partial admission, and DNA test results that confirmed Sheena was Indrani's biological daughter. Prosecutors leaned heavily on the driver's testimony his route descriptions, locations, and account of what each person did. Sanjeev corroborated parts of the story. He admitted to helping cover up the incident, confirmed he was in the car, and stated that Sheena lost consciousness after consuming a drink. He also acknowledged that the body had been burned in a wooded area near Penn. His confession aligned closely with Rai's earlier statements. However, the investigation faced serious setbacks. Surveillance footage from the estate where Indrani and Peter lived was mysteriously missing on the very day Sheena disappeared. Footage from other days was intact, but April 24, 2012 had no recordings. No explanation was ever found. There were also no direct physical traces proving what happened in the vehicle. No forensic evidence was recovered from the car or the clothing of the accused that could be used in court. Back in 2012, police failed to act promptly, which led to the loss of potential evidence. The case had been neglected from the start, which ultimately weakened the prosecution's foundation. The defense used every flaw in the investigation. Indrani and Peter had top-tier legal representation. They questioned the reliability of Rai's testimony, claiming he had implicated himself and others in exchange for leniency. Sanjeev's confession was called invalid due to alleged coercion. Even the DNA results were challenged, with the defense raising the possibility of lab errors or tampering. The trial dragged on. Despite the public attention, none of the accused were officially convicted. Neither Indrani nor Peter nor Sanjeev received a verdict. A case with a victim, multiple confessions, and a clear motive remained legally unresolved. Influence, resources, and expert defense proved stronger than witness statements and forensic matches. By 2022, all the primary figures in the case were free. Indrani Mukherjee, Sanjeev Khanna, Peter Mukherjee, and Shyamvar Rai had all been released from custody. The charges were never dropped, but no one received a formal sentence. Despite the confessions, forensic findings, factual alignments, and eyewitness testimony, there was no conviction. Although Rai provided law enforcement with critical information, he was eventually released. His cooperation with the investigation and lack of involvement in other serious offenses led to leniency in his case. Sanjeev, who admitted to helping conceal the body, also avoided legal consequences. Peter, accused of withholding information and being indirectly involved, was freed as investigators were unable to establish his direct participation. Indrani, the central figure in the case, continued to deny any wrongdoing and was released on bail. Rahul remained the only one still fighting for the truth. He had lost faith in the system. The legal process had shown how easily powerful individuals could avoid accountability. Despite confessions and hard evidence, justice wasn't served. A case with a clear victim, motive, witnesses, and physical proof ended without a verdict. Rahul understood there could be consequences for continuing to push forward. He lived with the constant awareness that he might face pressure, threats, or social isolation at any moment. He had no idea how far the people he challenged might go to protect themselves, but he had no intention of backing down. Sheena Bora was officially confirmed as deceased. DNA analysis identified her remains. However, by the time all individuals connected to the case had been released, no court had legally classified what happened to her as a crime. There were no formal charges, no convictions, no sentences. Sheena had vanished, and legally, her death remained undefined, never acknowledged as a criminal act. Rahul continues to pursue justice. For him, the case is far from over. His goal isn't recognition or revenge. It's to make sure Sheena's name doesn't disappear from the world the same way it vanished from the official record. Case 5. The 31st floor of a high-rise residential building in the heart of Hong Kong. Officers paused in front of apartment 1309. This wasn't your typical call. It didn't come from a witness or a concerned neighbor. It came from the apartment's owner himself. Over the phone, a man's voice said, "Something terrible has happened. You need to come immediately." When officers arrived, they were met with silence. No one answered the door, but from beneath it seeped a powerful, suffocating odor of decay. The building's security guard confirmed that residents on the lower floors had been complaining about a stench for several days, convinced the source was coming from this very unit. Police knocked. No response, only faint, unintelligible sounds, like someone murmuring to themselves behind the door. When they finally forced their way in, a wave of putrid air hit them instantly. Inside, the apartment was in chaos. Stained walls, scattered belongings, the air thick and stale. In the middle of the living room lay the body of a young woman, partially unclothed, with visible wounds to her neck and upper chest. Investigators quickly determined that she had been gone for quite some time. Not far from her, a man sat barefoot on the floor, holding a blood-stained knife. His eyes were vacant. His lips moved constantly, muttering incoherently about God, evil, and that it had already happened. He showed no reaction to the arrival of law enforcement. Officers quickly restrained him and called in a medical team. Then began the preliminary assessment of the scene. On the table, open alcohol bottles, traces of powdery substances on saucers, takeout boxes. On the floor, plastic bags, tangled cords, empty medication packages, and discarded clothing. Everything pointed to a prolonged, disordered stay inside the apartment. The forensic team worked for hours. The woman's body remained on the floor while they documented evidence, took photographs, and mapped out the layout. No one expected what came next. One officer approached a glass door that led to the balcony. It was sealed shut. When he slid it open, he recoiled. The same overpowering stench hit him again. Outside was a large black suitcase, and the smell coming from it left no doubt. The suitcase was closed, but its shape, weight, and the foul scent made the contents horrifyingly clear. Inside was another body. The remains had been dismembered. The parts were carefully wrapped in fabric and tightly packed. It looked less like an attempt to dispose of evidence, and more like someone had gone to great lengths to conceal what had happened. The suitcase had been placed in the far corner of the balcony, directly beneath a clothesline, perhaps in the hope that it would go unnoticed. Both victims were women, young with East Asian features. No passports, ID, or personal belongings were found near them. Their names, their stories, even the time they lost their lives remained unknown. But one thing was certain. Something horrific had unfolded in that apartment, and it hadn't happened overnight. Investigators documented every detail. The man found inside the apartment was taken into custody under heightened security. There were no signs of a struggle on his body. The medical team confirmed he was conscious, but his behavior remained highly erratic. He offered no explanations, only fragmented phrases about guilt, blood, and the final week. Hong Kong is one of the most densely populated urban centers in the world. Within a compact space, millions of people live amid constant noise, urgency, and overcrowding. Towering buildings stretch skyward, packed closely with barely any gaps in between. Every square foot comes at a premium, and most residents squeeze into tight apartments, often divided by thin partitions, where multiple individuals may share a single room. Those with more resources live higher up, behind thick glass facades in high-rise residences outfitted with security, surveillance, and private elevators. The contrasts are striking. At the base of these gleaming towers, narrow alleyways wind through grimy drainage lines, impromptu street stalls, and strange storefronts with no signage. During the day, these places seem deserted, but at night they come alive. In certain neighborhoods, behind the facade of bars and clubs filled with loud music and flowing drinks, a hidden system operates, one that quietly disguises unauthorized escort services as nightlife entertainment. Officially, these spots are listed as lounges or karaoke bars, where women work as hosts simply to entertain guests with conversation. In reality, many arrangements are made for private meetups at hotels or apartments. These businesses aren't openly advertised, but they're known among a select crowd, wealthy men, often foreigners, who know exactly where to go. The women working there usually don't have legal work permits and find themselves in a vulnerable position. They can't seek help, can't report mistreatment. Any complaint could risk deportation. Many of these women originally came to Hong Kong from underprivileged areas of Indonesia and the Philippines. In the past, they worked legally as domestic helpers under work visas, but once those permits expired, they had to leave. Some later returned on tourist visas, hoping to earn again and support their families back home. Club work often becomes their only available source of income. On paper, it's entertainment. In reality, it's off-the-books labor with risks, no protections, and strict oversight from the people who run the business. In the daily rush of city life, the disappearance of one woman rarely raises alarm, especially when she has no documentation, no legal status, and no formal ties. When someone in that position vanishes, it's not usually met with concern. It's often dismissed as routine. At best, a roommate or someone nearby might try to look for her. At worst, she's simply forgotten. Across the city, it's common to find apartments being rented off the books. Several tenants may share one room, paying in cash. It's simple, convenient, no background checks, no questions. For migrants, it's often the only housing option they can afford, but that same setup makes them almost invisible. If one of the tenants doesn't return one night, no one raises an alarm, even if days go by. Hong Kong runs like a well-oiled machine. There's no time to pause for one person. Those who fall outside the official system are treated as expendable. Their disappearance isn't considered an event. It's just another line in a statistic that no one pays attention to. Sumarti Ningsai was born in a small, impoverished village in Indonesia. Her family lived in difficult conditions from the beginning. They struggled to afford basic necessities, food, medicine, and school supplies for her younger brothers. When she became an adult, the decision was made. She would go abroad to earn money. Hong Kong was the only place where she could secure a work visa and find employment as a domestic helper. The work was tough but steady, long hours, little freedom, and living inside the home of her employers. Despite the hardship, Sumarti saw it as a chance. Her primary goal was to send as much money home as possible. She worked for 2 years until her visa expired. Unable to get it renewed, she had to return to her village. But nothing had changed there. Still the same poverty, the same pressure. Her family was counting on her. So Sumarti applied for a tourist visa and went back to Hong Kong. That status didn't allow her to work legally, but there was no alternative. Her family needed the income, and there were no other options. Jessie Larina faced a similar story. Also from a struggling village in Indonesia, she came to Hong Kong in 2006 with a valid work visa. For years, she worked legally as a domestic worker, extending her permits when possible. Everything changed in 2012 when her renewal was denied. Like Sumarti, Jessie had to return home. But eventually, she too came back to Hong Kong on a tourist visa, hoping to find some kind of work. Circumstances brought them to the same establishment, a club that officially posed as a bar with entertainment. In reality, it catered to clients seeking more than just drinks. That's where the women worked, despite having no legal right to be employed. Technically, they were there to create an atmosphere, socialize, dance. But most arrangements happened outside the club, private meetups for money. The pay was low, but they had no choice. They couldn't go to the authorities. Their status left them unprotected. No one checked their working conditions. They worked at night, lived in small rented rooms with no paperwork. Club management maintained quiet but constant control. Refusal or complaint meant immediate dismissal. And for someone working off the books, that meant no more income. It was under these conditions that both women disappeared. Sumarti vanished on October 26th. That evening, she had been at the club, spent time with clients, and then left. No one saw her again. Jessie went missing 6 days later on November 1st. She had also been on shift, then left, but never returned to her rented room. Despite the short gap between their disappearances, no one made the connection. Neither the police nor the club's management linked the two cases. Both women had no legal status, weren't in any official records. Their vanishings caused no public reaction. Only later did it become clear. They had both disappeared from the same location, followed the same work pattern, and as would later be discovered, both crossed paths with the same individual. But at the time they went missing, it was seen as just another loss among those living in the shadows. When Jessie Lorena didn't return home, her roommate began to worry. She first went to the club where Jessie worked. Staff told her Jessie had shown up the evening of November 1st, spent some time with a guest, and then left with him. No one had seen her since. Her phone went unanswered. After several days without any word, the roommate reached out to law enforcement. Only after persistent urging was a missing person report officially filed. Police requested surveillance footage from the club. In one of the videos, Jessie could be seen speaking with a man who was a frequent visitor. They were together for a short time before leaving the premises. Club staff recognized the man immediately. He came in often, always alone. He was calm, reserved, didn't socialize much, and never caused a disturbance. He also stood out for consistently leaving generous tips. Authorities were able to identify him quickly. His name was Rurik Jutting, a 29-year-old British national. He lived in a luxury high-rise, in an apartment on the 31st floor. According to surveillance footage, that's where he took Jessie on the day she disappeared. Police attempted to contact him, but he didn't respond. Sometime later, however, Jutting himself called. He said that something terrible had taken place in his apartment and asked for officers to come immediately. A response team was dispatched to the address he provided. What happened next became the starting point of a criminal investigation. Until then, Rurik Jutting hadn't raised any red flags. He gave the impression of a successful, well-educated professional, a young banker, part of the financial elite, with a polished appearance and an impeccable background. He worked at a major American investment firm and was considered a rising star. People who knew him described him as competent, punctual, and private. His social status, behavior in public, and lifestyle all aligned with the image of a confident international professional thriving in a global city. But what police discovered in his apartment shattered that illusion. Officers were stunned by the contrast between Jetting's public persona and what they found behind closed doors. The upscale apartment was in disarray. Inside was the body of a woman showing signs of severe trauma, along with numerous items pointing to serious criminal acts. Among the evidence were knives, restraints, containers linked to restricted substances, and digital devices containing material that later became key to the charges filed against him. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from the high-rise. The recordings showed both women entering the building on separate days. Neither of them was seen leaving. Security staff hadn't intervened, residents had unrestricted access, and cameras were mainly used for archived monitoring. Both women spent their final days in an apartment legally registered to someone with a spotless public image. After Rurik Jetting's arrest, he didn't resist. He acknowledged what had happened. There was no sign of panic or regret in his demeanor. He appeared worn out, detached, almost as if the situation didn't concern him personally. Rurik Jetting was born in London into a family that gradually achieved financial stability. His father worked as an engineer, and his mother was involved in business. Through consistent effort, they managed to build a comfortable life, eventually purchasing a home in a well-regarded suburban neighborhood. Growing up, Rurik lacked nothing. He had access to quality education, care, and attention. His parents heavily invested in his development, with high hopes for his future. From an early age, Rurik showed strong academic talent. He consistently performed well in school, excelling in both math and literature. Former classmates remembered him as quiet and withdrawn, but intellectually sharp. He avoided large social groups and preferred solitude. His academic success earned him a place at Cambridge, one of the UK's most prestigious universities. At university, he pursued economics. Soon after graduation, he landed a job with a major investment firm in London. His career advanced quickly. He moved between increasingly prominent banks, taking on more senior roles each time. Within just a few years, he earned a reputation as one of the most promising young professionals in finance. Colleagues described him as extremely driven, detail-oriented, and hardworking. When his employer, an American banking corporation, expanded operations in Hong Kong, Jetting was offered a key position in the new office. He accepted without hesitation. The move significantly increased his income. He rented a high-end apartment in an exclusive complex, setting up a spacious home with panoramic views. Everything about his lifestyle looked like a textbook success story. Youth, prestige, wealth, and social standing. Outwardly, he blended in perfectly with other professionals in the city's financial scene. But behind that polished exterior were traits that didn't stand out at first glance. Jetting was an introvert. He kept a small social circle, avoided personal connections, and had no interest in public life. At the same time, he carried a quiet sense of superiority. Those who interacted with him professionally acknowledged his competence, but rarely remembered anything personal. He shared little about his life and kept to himself. The first major disruption to his seemingly stable life came through a personal relationship. He had been involved with a woman named Sarah. Their relationship had lasted a while. Though it was long distance, she lived and worked in the U.S. while he was based in Hong Kong. According to people close to him, he was deeply attached to her and took the relationship seriously. The breakup came unexpectedly. Sarah began seeing someone else without giving Jetting advance notice. The experience hit him hard. He fell into depression, began therapy, and was prescribed medication. His mental state began to show in his behavior. Increased irritability, deeper isolation, and reduced focus. His relationships at work deteriorated. He missed deadlines, and his reputation started to decline. Internally, he was unraveling, a shift not immediately visible to others, but one that escalated quickly. During this period, his life began to unravel. He started using illegal substances, attending parties, and engaging in casual relationships. Gradually, he lost control, not only over his career, but also over himself. Around the same time, he began dating a new girlfriend, Ariane Guarin. Young, attractive, and active on social media, she frequently shared photos of their trips, dinners, and events. Their online presence appeared flawless. luxurious interiors, expensive restaurants, scenic flights. However, behind the beautiful images were arguments, outbursts of aggression, and the growing coldness with which Rurik treated her. The illegal substances heightened his irritability, making him harsh and unpredictable. The relationship soon fell apart. From that point, Jetting's life spiraled further out of control. His consumption of illicit substances increased. He became reclusive, rarely leaving his apartment, and disappeared from the radar of colleagues and acquaintances. His behavior grew so unstable that even those around him began to avoid contact. He lost friends, professional connections, and trust within the banking community. Simultaneously, alarming signs of deep psychological disturbances emerged. His social media posts became strange and illogical, filled with metaphors and phrases indicating internal destruction and a loss of connection with reality. He began using imagery of darkness, fear, and demise. A post from October 27th resembled a farewell note. "I'm jumping into the darkness. The journey has begun. I'm not afraid, but I'm excited. The first step is the hardest." This message puzzled those who read it, but no one took action. The next day, he resigned, without explanations or prior discussions. His work email was deactivated, but the auto-reply function remained active. Any email sent to his address automatically received the response, "I am out of the office indefinitely. Please do not contact a psychopath. In case of emergency, contact God, though I suspect custody has passed to the devil." This message seemed strange and inappropriate to colleagues. Most perceived it as a failed attempt at dark humor. Later, the email's content became part of the evidence. All these events occurred within a few days. The abrupt change in behavior, loss of self-control, social isolation, and aggressive forms of self-expression all indicated a deep internal crisis. However, no one intervened. Neither former colleagues, friends, nor acquaintances raised the alarm. His downfall was rapid, and stopping it was no longer possible. After Rurik Jetting's arrest and the search of his 31st floor apartment, the main phase of the investigation began. Investigators seized his mobile phone, revealing a horrifyingly complete picture of his crimes. The device contained dozens of videos and photographs in which he documented his actions toward two women. The content left no doubt. Everything that happened was deliberate, meticulously recorded, and intentional on his part. The first video was recorded shortly after the death of Samardi Ningsi. The camera focused on Rurik, sitting next to the body. His speech was calm and cold-blooded. "My name is Rurik. 5 minutes ago I killed this woman. Since Saturday she was here. Today is Monday. I kept her locked up. She was good. But that doesn't mean anything," he stated. These words conveyed neither remorse nor shock. He described the events as if summarizing an experiment. In other videos, he shared thoughts about what had been happening inside the apartment. He said he barely got off the couch, survived on delivered pizza, consumed illegal substances, and drank alcohol. The recordings painted a picture of someone conscious, but completely detached from moral norms. "I don't feel guilt. There's something, but it's not guilt. I feel like a stranger to myself," he said. These were not impulsive actions. Every move was carefully recorded on camera. Surveillance footage showed him leaving the apartment and returning with 2 large duffel bags. Inside were saws, knives, and kitchen tools. All of it was used to dismember Samardi's body. He placed the remains into a heavy-duty bag and left it on the balcony. Afterward, he made no effort to cover his tracks or leave the city. A few days later, he went back to the same club where he'd met his first victim. There, he approached Jessie Lorena. He offered her money to come to his apartment. Unlike the previous time, he didn't wait. The crime took place that same night. Her body was left in the middle of the room, and Jetting was still beside it when officers arrived. He was covered in blood, holding a knife, and speaking incoherently. The recordings made it clear that these acts weren't the result of a breakdown, but a conscious decision. After the first crime, he chose to repeat it. His own words were chilling. "That was an experience. I want to do it again." The video files became more than just evidence. They were direct confessions, captured and preserved by the perpetrator himself. Following his arrest, Rurik Jetting was taken into custody, and during the initial interview, he immediately gave a full confession. Without pressure or hesitation, he described what had happened, made no excuses, and didn't attempt to soften the facts. He admitted to holding one of the women captive for several days before ending her life, and detailed the sequence of events. Investigators noted that he spoke calmly, showing no visible emotion. The next step was a mandatory, court-ordered psychological evaluation. Several specialists assessed him. The goal was to determine whether Yetting had the capacity to understand his actions and their consequences at the time of the crimes. Every professional involved reached the same conclusion. He was of sound mind and fully accountable. Though he was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, a condition marked by egocentrism, lack of empathy, and a tendency to dominate, this did not absolve him legally or exempt him from trial. The defense team attempted to reduce the sentence, arguing that he had been in a fragile emotional state, battling a substance dependency, and suffering psychological instability during the period in question. Former girlfriends testified that he had once been balanced, caring, and non-confrontational. The defense tried to portray the tragedy as the collapse of a person under the weight of addiction and mental deterioration. However, the court did not accept this narrative. Investigators demonstrated that the crimes were not crimes of passion. They were carefully premeditated, supported by recordings in which Yetting methodically described his actions. The court classified his conduct as intentional, cold, and brutal. The evidence, his own confessions, phone records, photos, and video files, left no room to interpret his actions as those of someone out of touch with reality or in a temporary state of crisis. In October 2016, the court delivered its final verdict. Rurik Yetting was found guilty on both counts. He received 2 life sentences, one for each crime, without the possibility of parole. The decision meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. During the sentencing, he remained silent. His face showed no emotion, no gestures, no expressions, no trace of inner turmoil. Even when it became clear that he would never walk free again, Yetting displayed neither remorse nor resistance. His complete indifference became the final note in a deeply disturbing case. Despite the numerous recordings and his own confessions, Yetting never provided a clear answer to the question, why did he do it? The court interpreted this as a lack of remorse and a conscious choice to engage in extreme aggression. Case 6. I really don't want to go to sleep anymore. Okay. It makes me to where I'm too scared. Okay. I really don't want to go to sleep. Okay. On the night of September 30th, 2005, Robin saw a nightmare, a dream where she heard gunshots so loud they penetrated through her ears. But when she woke up, the nightmare didn't end. The gunshots were real. The deafening cracks of gunfire tore through the house. And then came the screams, her mother's screams. Panic seized her as she jumped from her bed, crouching by the door, trying to make sense of the chaos. Then came the footsteps, heavy, unfamiliar, and closing in. The sound of boots pounding against the wooden floor sent terror through her body. She barely had time to react before she launched herself back into bed, pulling the covers over her and lying still, forcing herself to disappear into the darkness. Then came the shots once again. 2 rounds fired directly at her. One grazed her left leg, the other tore past her arm. She didn't move. She didn't make a sound. The footsteps turned away, moving toward her brother's room. The gunshots started again. This time, there were no screams, only a faint, agonized moan before silence swallowed the house once more. However, this silence was far from peaceful. It told a story of misfortune that swallowed the happiness of a loving family. For 2.5 hours, Robin lay frozen in place, her body rigid, her breath shallow, forcing herself to remain invisible. The stench of gunpowder and blood clung to the air. The house, once filled with warmth, had become a graveyard of both bodies and dreams. But she couldn't stay there forever. Summoning every ounce of courage, she forced herself to move. Stepping over the carnage, she made her way to the phone and dialed 911. Her fingers trembled as she pressed each button, her heart pounding against her ribs. She knew one thing. Whatever horror had unfolded in that house, she was the only one left to tell the story. However, hope lingered as she called for help. The nightmare wasn't over yet. The call came in just before dawn. It was a child's weak voice, small and trembling, cutting through the static of the 911 dispatch. The little girl wanted help for somebody to come to the house and somehow make this nightmare end. The operator tried to calm her down, repeating assurances that help was on the way. But out in the middle of nowhere, time stretched unbearably long. Robin Doan stood alone in the darkness. The walls around her, the only home she had ever known, were now painted with bloodstains of her only loved ones. Texas State Trooper Chad Brooks heard the call. He pressed his foot to the gas pedal. But no matter how fast he drove, it wasn't fast enough. I heard my mama scream. Robin sobbed into the phone. The desperation in her voice clawed at his chest. It was a child's life that depended on him. He had to move fast. Somewhere beyond the static of the radio, Aaron Moriarty, a journalist from 48 Hours, was already asking the question that would haunt this case. Why this family? Why this house? Whoever had pulled the trigger hadn't just executed an entire household. They had left behind something they never intended to. A witness. 15 shots had torn through the farmhouse that night, and yet Robin Doan had survived. The little girl gave directions with a clarity that she had just acquired. The incident had suddenly made her so much more responsible. It's on Highway 70, about 13.3 miles out from the bowling alley. She told the dispatcher that she had a purple shirt and purple pants on, making sure they identify her as soon as they reached the scene. It was as if listing these details gave her a grip on reality, something to anchor her in her world that had just collapsed. Trooper Brooks' headlights finally cut through the darkness. As his car rolled onto the gravel driveway, a small figure appeared, Robin, clutching the phone like a lifeline. She didn't wait. She ran straight to him. He caught her in his arms, and for a moment, she was just a terrified little girl. She spoke in frantic, desperate detail, telling him everything she had seen, everything she had heard. It was surreal how articulate she was, how she relayed the horror with such chilling precision. He told her it's going to be okay, but he knew better. Nothing about this was okay. He couldn't take her inside, not back into that house, not after what had happened. So he placed her in the patrol car and locked it, shielding her from the unfolding nightmare. Officers moved in with their guns drawn. The house had to be cleared and checked for survivors, if there were any left. The eerie quiet of the crime scene made every step feel heavier. Inside, the horrific truth awaited them. Sheriff Gary Henderson stood at the threshold, taking in the scene. There was no sign of struggle, no warning. It was as if life had been going on as normal, a coffee pot set to brew in the morning, a home preparing for the arrival of a new baby. It was until someone decided to snatch the piece of normality away. The east door had been kicked in. The shooter hadn't hesitated. Brian Conrad had been shot 3 times. Michelle 6. Even the family dog Molly hadn't been spared. 2 bullets to silence her barking. Robin sat in the patrol car, her eyes locked on the front door. She didn't know what they were seeing inside. She only knew what she was hoping for. She told herself her family would come out any second now, that they would be okay, just like she was. But no one walked out, and in the haunting silence of that Texas dawn, Robin Doan realized she was truly left alone. Had the bullet pierced through her body, Robin Doan would not have lived to tell her story. But she had lived, and now the weight of that survival pressed against her like an unbearable force. Zach had not been so lucky. He had been shot 3 times in his sleep. He never woke up. Robin couldn't bring herself to ask the question that was clawing at her insides. Who else is alive? Chad Brooks, watching her, knew there was nothing he could do to undo what had happened. But he could do something, however small, to pull her back from the brink of losing it. When asked if there was anything she needed, her answer was heartbreakingly simple. She just wanted to feed her animals. And so, in the midst of the unimaginable horror, they did. He followed her to the barn, helping her toss hay to the goats. For a moment, Robin was just a little girl again, laughing at how much feed he tried to give them. The switch flipped. She spoke about how she and her brother Zach would play a game of feeding their animals, how it turned into a competition sometimes. Life almost felt normal again, but as soon as they stepped away from the barn, the illusion shattered. The nightmare crept back in. Robin clung to his arm, shaking. Eyes wide with the truth, she had finally gathered the courage to say aloud. She already knew the answer, but the weight of it pressed down on her as she hesitantly voiced the question. Was her mother and Brian coming back? No one wanted to say it, but she had to hear it. No, they weren't coming out. She was the only one who had walked out of that house alive. She tried to hold on to something, anything, to keep the pain at bay. And there was one thing, one small sense of ease. Zach never woke up. He never knew. He never felt it. And for that, Robin was grateful. 12 hours after the massacre, Robin found herself in a small room at the bridge, a children's advocacy center. The walls closed in around her. A camera stared down from the corner, with a microphone near her face to record the horrors that she had faced. She sat across from an advocate, answering the questions she had already answered too many times. She admitted that she didn't want to close her eyes, because that was when the terror crept back in. Robin repeated what she had told the 911 operator. The gunshots, the screaming, the scary footsteps, and the silence that followed. The advocate pressed gently, asking if she had heard anyone speak on that fateful night. Robin shook her head. Because nobody talked, it was just a matter of minutes that someone walked in through the doors and took away all the lives in her home. She described what she had seen, or what she thought she had seen. A flash from the gun. A white face in the dark. Investigators listened carefully, knowing every detail could be crucial. When asked how many shots had been fired, Robin responded without hesitation. 15. And when they processed the crime scene, that's exactly what they found. 15 casings. 15 shots fired. A number burned into a 10-year-old girl's memory at 3 in the morning. She reached her limit then. Robin could no longer bear to talk about it. The interview ended. But for law enforcement, it was the beginning of a mission. They had no suspects, no motive, no explanation, and most concerning of all, no guarantee that whoever had done this wasn't planning to do it again. Robin was placed under protection. The authorities weren't taking any chances. She was moved to a secure location with her biological father, stepmother, and stepsister. Surveillance cameras surrounded the perimeter. She wasn't allowed to leave for her own safety, except for the funeral. The community poured into the church, grief-stricken, and also scared for their safety. The Conrads had been the kind of family people looked up to, humble, hardworking, unproblematic. Their deaths shattered the peace that the town once held. Robin sat in the pew, her eyes moving from casket to casket. First one, then another, then the third, again and again. What happened was not fair at all. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Meanwhile, Texas Rangers had set up surveillance, scanning the crowd for anything suspicious. But nothing stood out. Doors that were once left unlocked were now bolted shut. Rifles were moved from storage closets to bedside tables. Parents tucked their children in at night with one hand on the light switch and the other on a loaded gun. All had their guards up. Somewhere out there, a killer was still walking free. Investigators worked tirelessly, going through the evidence again and again. Shell casings, blood spatter, tire tracks, footprints that didn't belong to anyone in the house. But there was no DNA, no fingerprints, and no reason. This wasn't a robbery. Nothing had been stolen. So what was it? One theory emerged, a possible drug hit, maybe a violent mistake, the wrong house. But with every lead came a dead end. And the only question that mattered, the one that haunted every sleepless night, remained unanswered. Who did this? Meanwhile, in the state of Missouri, detectives were piecing together the McCool murders. The bullets left behind were an unusual size, the kind that wasn't commonly sold in stores. A deputy recalled a recent burglary report of a man named Scott King, who had reported that his son, Levi, had broken into his home, stolen weapons, and disappeared. The ammunition matched. The hunt was on. The Missouri sun had barely crept over the horizon when Matthew McCool's phone received a call. A relative's voice cracked through the line. He'd been trying to reach Matthew's mother, Dawn McCool, but there was no answer. A flicker of unease passed through Matthew, but he brushed it aside. It wasn't unusual for his mother to miss a call or two. By midday, he grew more concerned. He left work as his hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly as he drove toward his family home. When he arrived, his stomach lurched. A relative stood outside, pale and trembling. The words barely made it past his lips. They were dead. He delivered the news with a heavy finality. Matthew barely heard the rest. His mother and grandfather, Orley McCool, had been murdered. Detectives arrived, methodically combing the crime scene. Shell casings littered the floor, their metallic sheen catching the light. As we discussed before, the bullets were an unusual size. They were not the kind you would pick at a local sporting goods store. Sheriff Michael Hall recalled a recent burglary report. A neighbor, Scott King, had reported that his son, Levi, had broken into his gun safe and stolen several firearms. The ammo matched. Levi King, a name already known to law enforcement, a ghost that slithered through the cracks of the system. He torched a neighbor's house years earlier, spent a brief period in prison, then vanished from a halfway house. And now the blood of the McCools soaked into the floors of their home. Authorities wasted no time. A warrant was issued, and within hours, a nationwide alert went out for the McCools' stolen Dodge Dakota. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, a Border Patrol officer in El Paso, Texas, flagged a suspicious vehicle, a routine stop. But when the officer glanced at the man behind the wheel, something felt off. The truck's plates came back stolen. The driver's name was Levi King. They found guns in the truck bed. King remained eerily calm as investigators pressed him for answers, his demeanor unsettling in its emptiness. Then just 15 minutes into the interrogation, he confessed. He recounted the first shot, how his target spun and collapsed. When questioned about the woman, His composure wavered for the briefest moment before he admitted to murdering her out of fear. With that, detectives had enough to tie him to the McCool murders. But King wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his expression unreadable, as if weighing whether to reveal something even darker. "There's 4 more in Texas." The words hung in the air. Detective Don Ruby's breath stopped for a second. Was King taunting them? Or had his killing spree stretched even further? A gut-wrenching phone call confirmed their worst fears. A family in the Texas Panhandle had been slaughtered days earlier. It was the Doan family. Levi King's rampage had spanned 2 states and left 6 people dead. He had moved like a phantom through the night, executing strangers without hesitation. For what? A thrilling experience? Missouri took first claim to justice. King pleaded guilty and received 2 consecutive life sentences. But Texas wasn't as forgiving. The jury saw a monster, a man who killed because he could, because it exhilarated him. The courtroom was suffocating in its silence. Levi King sat motionless, his fate hanging in the balance. The man responsible for a senseless, merciless rampage that left multiple lives in ruin was about to learn his destiny. Gary Henderson, a resident of the devastated town, voiced the question that would forever haunt those left behind. Why? Why this family? Why this day? Why this town? But there were no answers. Only the chilling realization that sometimes horror had no reason. It simply arrived, uninvited, unstoppable. Lynn Switzer, the former district attorney of Gray County, had no illusions about the kind of monster sitting in the defendant's chair. There truly are people out there who are just plain evil. Levi King is one of those people, she declared, her voice steady, in front of the jury. 12 people held the power to decide his fate, and she was asking them for the ultimate sentence, which was death. But the weight of justice is never easy to bear. Defense attorney Jomar Wilson understood that the sheer brutality of the crime could not be overlooked. The only hope was to convince the jury that permanent imprisonment was punishment enough, that ensuring he would never walk free again, never having the chance to hurt another soul, was justice in its own right. For Switzer, this case had consumed her, creeping into her dreams, seeping into her waking thoughts. Yet, despite her best efforts, the burden of uncertainty lingered, because in the pursuit of justice, there were no guarantees. The jury deliberated for nearly 8 excruciating hours, and when they returned, their verdict sent a shockwave through the courtroom. One juror refused to vote for the death penalty. One single holdout, standing firm against the others, sealed Levi King's fate. The sentence would be life without parole. Robin Doan, the lone survivor of King's killing spree, sat frozen as the decision was read. She turned to Switzer, saw the shadow of devastation flicker across her face. It almost looked like she had failed us, Robin later recalled. But deep down, Robin knew the truth. Switzer had fought with everything she had. She had fought for her family. And for that, no words of gratitude would ever be enough. Levi King would be extradited back to Missouri to serve his sentence, and Robin was more than fine with that. Texas is my state. I don't want you back in my state. You've already done your damage here. But even with King behind bars, Robin's battle was far from over. Pampa was more than just home. It was now a haunting ground. Every street and corner, a painful reminder of what had been stolen from her. Leaving felt like surrender, like she had admitted defeat. Yet staying meant facing the memories of that night over and over again. No matter where she went, the fear clung to her, inescapable and all too real. Those closest to her saw the wounds that couldn't be bandaged, the scars that remained unseen. Denise Mackey, her former coach and confidant, had witnessed the quiet torment Robin carried. The nightmares, the echoes of her mother's screams, the relentless grip of fear, none of it ever truly faded. Late at night, Robin's messages would come. She heard things. She was scared, and no matter how composed she seemed on the surface, the darkness still lived inside her. Superstition became her shield against the darkness. That night, I had on socks, long sleeves, and long pants. I will never sleep in long sleeves, long pants, or socks again. I won't sleep with my door open. I feel like there's a figure standing in my doorway. Every time Robin walked into an empty house, she checked every room, every closet, making sure no one was there, even though the real nightmare had already passed. Some things, though, could never be shut away. Birthdays were the hardest, painful reminders of what she had lost. Even her own didn't feel right without them. Robin wanted her mom, her family, her life back. She had tried therapy, but it didn't help. If she needed to talk, she turned to her family or the officers who had been there. She thinks a stranger cannot understand. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to be seen as different. Robin just wanted to feel normal, but normal would always be out of reach. Levi King had walked into her life like a nightmare and took away everything she ever loved. No verdict, no prison sentence could ever undo what he had taken. The painful memories were hers to bear alone. Still, there were people who refused to let her walk this path without support. Those who truly understood her pain stood by her, determined to help her find a way forward, even if that road was still shrouded in darkness, and Robin is forever grateful for that. Case 7. The patriarch, Carl Bluestone. Carl was 36 at the time of the tragic events, and let me tell you, he wasn't some rookie cop. He was an experienced, seasoned police officer with the Rural Support Tactical Team of the Kent Police Force in England. Born and raised in a small coastal town, Carl had what you could call a peaceful yet challenging childhood. His dad worked as a mechanic, and his mom was a primary school teacher. From a young age, Carl was known for his strong character and his sense of responsibility. He wasn't just a bystander in his community. He was involved, regularly volunteering for causes like supporting orphanages and taking part in local environmental cleanup campaigns. The kid was all about action. As a young man, Carl became obsessed with stories of justice and bravery. Those heroic police officers you see in movies and read about in books. So, it was no surprise when he decided to pursue a career in public policing. After completing his undergraduate degree in criminology in London, Carl joined the Kent Police Force, eager to make his mark. Now it didn't take long for Carl to prove himself. He quickly became known as an outstanding officer, especially in patrolling and emergency response. For the first 10 years of his career, Carl worked in the hustle and bustle of busy urban areas. But eventually he realized there was a need for a strong police presence in rural areas, too. So, Carl transitioned to the Rural Support Tactical Team, where he specialized in complex cases, things like cattle rustling, poaching, and protecting rural areas from organized crime. As you can guess, Carl had a natural gift for connecting with the people in the communities he served. He earned their trust and cooperation, which made him a very effective officer. He showed great leadership and made smart decisions, especially in stressful situations. One of his biggest cases involved leading his team to take down a group involved in poaching rare animals, helping bring more than 10 people to justice. For Carl, being a police officer wasn't just a job. It was his way of standing up for what he believed in and protecting what mattered most to him. And of course, at some point, he must have thought, if I can protect an entire community, why not start building my own family? That thought slowly became a reality. In 1993, Carl's life took another significant turn when he met Jill at a social party in Kent. Jill, at 31, was a successful administrative officer at Basildon Council. With her intelligence, independence, and solid career, Jill was the kind of woman who naturally attracted attention. But it was Carl, with his calm demeanor and engaging conversational style, who really caught her eye. Carl, for his part, was immediately impressed by Jill's sharpness and strong sense of independence. She was the kind of woman who seemed to have everything together in life. It didn't take long before they started dating, and through their regular meetings, evening walks by the sea, and weekend trips, their bond deepened. By 1994, just a year after they met, they decided to tie the knot when Jill became pregnant with their first child. The wedding was simple, yet deeply meaningful. It was an intimate affair, with only close family and friends in attendance. The joy in the air was contagious as Carl and Jill exchanged vows, the smiles on everyone's faces a clear reflection of the hopeful future they were stepping into. After their wedding, Carl stayed with the Kent Police Force and slowly moved up the ranks. He was respected by his team and admired by many. Jill, just as hardworking, kept growing in her role as an administrative officer at Basildon Council. Together, they worked hand in hand to build a life filled with love, stability, and success. They were the kind of couple people looked up to, strong in their careers, and deeply committed to their growing family. At first, life felt almost perfect. The couple welcomed 3 more children, and with each new addition, their bond seemed to grow stronger. Their home was full of laughter, milestones, and memories. From the outside looking in, they were a picture of happiness, a loving mom and dad for beautiful children, and careers that kept getting better. Friends and neighbors would often say they were goals. But sometimes what you see on the outside doesn't reflect what's really going on behind closed doors. As time passed, tiny cracks began to show in what seemed like a flawless life. These signs were small at first, hardly noticeable. But by the year 2000, things had started to change in a serious way. Carl, who had always been known for his calm and confident presence in uniform, was becoming someone very different at home. To his coworkers and friends, Carl still appeared kind and put together. But to Jill and the kids, he was becoming someone they barely recognized. At home, his patience began to wear thin. He started controlling things that didn't seem like a big deal, like where Jill went, who she talked to, and how she spent her time. What started as small comments slowly turned into strict rules, and those rules turned into threats. It didn't stop there. His voice, once calm and soft, was now full of anger. He began yelling during arguments, screaming so loud that it scared the children and left Jill shaking. Then came the violence. One night, while Jill was pregnant with their fourth child, they had an argument that got out of control. Carl exploded in anger and struck her, hard, hitting her shoulder and chest. She was left bruised, shocked, and afraid. That was the moment everything changed. From then on, the violence became part of their daily life. The man who had once protected communities was now the one they needed protection from. Carl's temper only grew worse. He would wave a knife in front of Jill, his hands trembling with rage, warning her not to test him. When things didn't go his way, he would throw objects, sometimes even in the direction of the children, just to scare them into silence. If Jill ever tried to leave the house during an argument, Carl would lock the doors, trapping her inside. The happy home they had built slowly turned into a place of fear. Jill, once full of confidence and joy, became quiet and cautious, always on edge. The children, too, learned to tiptoe around their father, hoping not to set him off. What once looked like a dream life from the outside had become a nightmare no one saw coming. By June of 2001, after years of walking on eggshells, Jill finally hit her breaking point. She had stayed strong for so long, but the pain, the fear, and the control had taken too much from her. It had drained her spirit. She reached deep inside herself, found the courage that had been buried, and made a choice, a powerful, life-changing choice. She told Carl she wanted a divorce, but instead of listening, instead of understanding that he had gone too far, Carl completely lost control. His ego, already bruised by years of clinging to power through violence, couldn't take the idea of losing her. His rage exploded. He attacked Jill again, but this time, it was worse, much worse. He wrapped his hands around her neck and began to choke her. Jill couldn't even fight back. She passed out right there in their home. It could have ended her life. Thankfully, a neighbor heard the commotion and stepped in just in time. If it weren't for that brave soul, Jill might not have made it out alive. Now, some people might ask, why didn't Jill report him sooner? Why didn't she press charges or just leave before things got so bad? And those are fair questions. When we look at situations like this from the outside, it can be hard to understand why someone would stay. But once you hear the full story, you'll see that it's never that simple. And after you do, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments too. Your voice matters. The truth is, when you're married to someone who hurts you, it's not just a matter of packing up and walking away. It's about surviving. Every single day becomes a careful balancing act, trying not to say the wrong thing, trying not to trigger another outburst. You learn to live in fear, and that fear controls everything you do. Asking for a divorce nearly cost Jill her life. So imagine what she feared might happen if she called the police or filed for a restraining order. What if Carl came after her with more fury? What if the system didn't protect her? These weren't just what-ifs. They were real possibilities that she had to think about every day. And let's not forget, Carl wasn't just hurting Jill. He was hurting their kids too. Every time he screamed, every time he broke something, every time he threatened their mom, they were watching. They were learning to be afraid. Jill knew that one wrong move could put all of them in even more danger. Escaping wasn't just brave. It took strength in every possible way. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and physically. However, on the 25th of August, 2001, Jill finally sat down with Carl and explained her plans. She told him she was moving to Basildon with their children, intending to put the house up for sale and start over. As expected, Carl accused her of having an affair, just like he had done countless times in the past. However, it was no secret that Carl himself had been unfaithful numerous times, including having an affair with a female colleague. Jill had even confronted this woman over the phone about it. Jill had also confided in her sister-in-law, Caroline, revealing that Carl's infidelity had pushed her into an affair with one of her own colleagues. This was a secret Jill had been carrying for a while. But now the truth was out. A few days later, Jill grew increasingly worried about Carl's behavior. On the 27th of August, Jill called Caroline again, expressing her fear that Carl had lost control. She also suspected he was secretly recording her private conversations, both at home and in the car. The tension between them was reaching a boiling point, and on that same evening, Carl made an unusual purchase at a local store. He bought a long piece of rope. When the store assistant asked why he needed it, Carl claimed it was for moving heavy furniture, but Jill knew something was off. On the 28th of August, after finishing his work shift, Carl went to a local pub for a drink with colleagues. Later, he stopped at a store to pick up groceries. By the time he returned home, the neighborhood was quiet. He spoke briefly with a neighbor before heading inside. It was then that the nightmare began. After watching an episode of The Bill, a popular police drama, Carl exploded in a fit of violent rage. Neighbors reported hearing shouting and a loud argument coming from the Bluestone house. Then, moments later, Jill's 6-year-old daughter, Jessica, appeared at a neighbor's door, panic-stricken and crying, saying, "Daddy's banging my head on the wooden floor. My daddy is hitting my mommy. Please call the police. I don't want daddy to kill mommy." Jessica cried, her terrified voice ringing out in the still night air. Her words sent chills through the neighbors, who immediately called the police. By the time the police arrived at the Bluestone home, they were met with a scene so horrific it would haunt them forever. Jill's body was found lifeless on the kitchen floor, brutally murdered with 13 hammer blows to the back of her head. Her 3-year-old son, Henry, was discovered at the bottom of the stairs, badly injured, with 10 hammer wounds to his head. The injuries on his hands showed that he had tried to defend himself against his father's attack. Baby Chandler, just 18 months old, was found in his crib, suffering from 6 blows to his forehead. Despite being rushed to the hospital, Chandler's injuries were too severe, and he tragically died. Jill's 7-year-old son, Jack, was discovered alive but severely injured. He was curled up in a fetal position on the bottom bunk of his bed. Jack was quickly brought to the hospital, along with his younger sister, Jessica, who had bravely run for help. When paramedics reached Jessica, she was in a state of shock, repeatedly saying, "I can't get mommy out of my mind," her words filled with grief and terror. Both children were rushed to the hospital, with Jack in critical condition. Meanwhile, neighbors had reported hearing strange noises coming from the garage. When police entered with flashlights, they found Carl hanging from a beam inside the garage. It was clear that Carl had taken his own life, a tragic end to a horrifying act of violence. Carl's death meant that he would never stand trial for the brutal murders of his wife and children, but an inquest was held to investigate the events leading up to that night. The inquest revealed disturbing details that raised questions about how the situation had been handled by the authorities. Jill had reported 4 separate incidents of domestic violence to the police, yet no action had been taken. In the first incident, Jill contacted the police after Carl had physically assaulted her during an argument. She had visible bruises on her arms and told officers that Carl had pinned her to the wall. She also mentioned that this wasn't the first time he had hurt her, but it was the first time she felt brave enough to make a formal report. However, instead of taking action, the officers noted it as a domestic disagreement and left the scene without arresting Carl or even issuing a warning. No follow-up was made. The second report came a few months later. This time, Carl had thrown a heavy household object, some sources say it was a chair, at Jill in front of one of their children. The child had been terrified and screaming, but again when Jill called the police, the officers did not make an arrest. She told them she feared the violence would get worse, but the incident was again downplayed. Though it was more serious than the first, officers allegedly advised Jill to give it time or seek counseling. No protective measures were taken. The third and fourth incidents were the most serious. On both occasions, Jill had made formal complaints and even provided photographic evidence of her injuries, as well as statements from neighbors who had heard or witnessed Carl shouting, throwing things, and threatening Jill. In one instance, a neighbor told officers that they had seen Carl dragging Jill by her hair into the house. The police actually acknowledged the seriousness of these cases and forwarded them to the Crown Prosecution Service, which is responsible for deciding whether charges should be brought in criminal cases. But even though 2 full case files were submitted to the CPS, no charges were filed. The reasoning? It was claimed that there was insufficient evidence, or that Jill might not be a reliable witness because she had once briefly returned to Carl after an incident. No one seemed to consider that victims of abuse often feel trapped or manipulated and may stay out of fear or financial dependence. Even more frustrating was the fact that, Despite having 4 reports on file and 2 investigations that reached the CPS, no restraining order was issued, no social worker was assigned, and no safety plan was put in place. The police failed to treat Jill's situation as a high-risk domestic violence case, even though it clearly was. She was never offered a referral to a women's shelter, and Carl was never required to attend anger management or counseling. Domestic violence advocacy groups were quick to condemn the police for failing to take the necessary actions to protect Jill and her children. The groups argued that if Carl had received counseling or proper intervention, this horrific event might have been avoided. They also highlighted that Jill and her children had been failed by the very system that was meant to protect them. The inquest concluded that Carl Bluestone's behavior had gone unchecked, and the tragic events that unfolded could have been prevented with the right support and intervention. Time and time again we see stories like this, where the signs were there, but the system failed to act. But this time, it feels even more tragic, because Jill didn't just have to fight her abuser. She had to fight the very system that was supposed to protect her. And in the end, that system let her down. So now I ask you, if you were in Jill's shoes, what would you have done? When the person hurting you wears a badge and no one listens, what then? It's a hard question, but one we should all think about, because stories like this are still happening today.